Ronan had the kind of grin that usually meant he was either bluffing or about to say something stupid, and with him, it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. He sat across from me at the kitchen table of my compound with a handful of cards fanned out in one hand and a pile of chips in front of him. "You keep staring at those cards like they're going to change. Either bet or fold," he said. I looked down at my hand again, mostly to annoy him. The table between us was old scarred oak, the surface cut and dented from years of use, bad decisions, and cleaning weapons where normal people would probably just eat their dinner. A single lamp hung over us and threw just enough light to cover the table, leaving the rest of the room in low shadow. That was how I liked it. Guns were within reach. The fridge in the next room hummed softly behind reinforced steel. It would have passed for a quiet night if Ronan hadn't been in it. "You talk too much," I said. "And you brood too much. We all got hobbies." He flicked 2 chips into the center and leaned back in his chair, boots hooked on one of the rungs. He looked perfectly at home in a place that wasn't built for comfort and wasn't meant for company. That was one of the strange things about him. Ronan could make himself look like he belonged anywhere. In a bar, in a fight, in the woods, at my kitchen table eating somebody else's food. He had that kind of confidence. I was about to call when I heard tires on the gravel outside. My head turned toward the front door before I even thought about it. Ronan stops talking. His nostrils flared once, then again, and then that grin widened a little. "SUVs," he said. I listened to the slow crunch of tires moving up the driveway. 2 vehicles by the sound of it. "You inviting people over here now?" I asked Ronan. "Of course not." The engines died outside and footsteps crossed the porch. A knock came at the door. 3 even hits from somebody who already knew that I would answer. I got up, crossed the room, and unlocked the deadbolt. When I opened the door, the night air came in cold and dry off the property. A man in a black suit stood on the porch wearing sunglasses even though it was fully dark outside. He looked like he had been built in a lab. 2 more men in matching suits were behind him near the SUVs, unloading coolers from the back. The man in front held one out to me. "Delivery," he said. That was it. No hello, no name, no wasted breath. I took the cooler from him. The faint metallic smell leaking through the plastic and ice told me enough. Blood. One of the men behind him carried the second cooler past me and set it just inside the doorway. Ronan looked down at it, then up at the man in sunglasses. "How the hell did you know I was here?" Ronan asked. The man didn't miss a beat. "You wouldn't believe what we know." He handed me a sealed manila folder. "Your next assignment," he said. Then he turned and walked back toward the driveway like the conversation was over. The other 2 followed him. Doors shut, engines came alive. Headlights swung across the field. Then the vehicles rolled back down the dirt road and vanished into the dark. I shut the door and locked it. You can never be too safe. Behind me, Ronan called from his cooler to mine with open interest. I carried my cooler back to the table and set the folder down beside it. When I popped the lid, a wash of cold air rolled over my hands. Blood bags packed in ice. Standard supply. Enough to keep me going through a hunt if things stayed clean. If they didn't, then I drank faster. I pulled one out, bit the cap, and drank it down while Ronan flipped open his own cooler. He stared inside for half a second, then let out the kind of delighted noise that made me immediately regret sharing a room with him. "Oh, these people get me," he said. I looked over. Inside his cooler were sealed containers, each one packed around a human heart. I made a face before I could help it. "Ugh, man, what the hell?" Ronan looked up at me with exaggerated offense. Don't judge me in my moment of joy. He reached in and took one out, turning it in his hand like he was admiring a good cut of steak. You seriously gonna eat that shit? Big talk coming from the guy who literally drinks human blood, he said. That's fair. Damn right it is. He flashed a grin and held the heart up a little. Same deal as your bags. Ethically harvested, nobody murdered. Everybody signed paperwork somewhere. Probably. That last part doesn't inspire confidence. Confidence is overrated. Then he bit into it. I looked away on principle and finished my blood bag while he worked on the first heart like he'd been handed a favorite snack after a long road trip. He ate the second one slower, enjoying himself in a way that would have made most people leave the room. By the time he was done, he looked genuinely pleased with life. I opened the folder. Crime scene photos were clipped to the inside flap. Farmhouse kitchen, blood up the cabinets, a table overturned. One of the chairs broken, in a living room, deep marks carved into the floorboards. Too long for knives. Front porch, sheriff lights painting the yard blue and red while deputies stood off camera trying not to step in what was left. I turned the page. Family of 8, I read aloud. Ronan wiped a hand on a napkin and leaned in across the table. That bad? Parents, 6 kids, teenagers. His grin disappeared. Ronan liked to perform being heartless, but he wasn't. I kept reading. Local police responded to a 911 call from a neighbor reporting screaming at approximately 1:14 a.m. Arriving officers discovered signs of forced entry from below the surface. Extensive blood loss, partial remains, and evidence of multiple assailants. From below. That ain't never a good sentence, Ronan said. I turned another page. Recon notes this time, cleaner and more useful. Outfit recon team entered the property under cover of forensic support and identified evidence of an underground colony predator event. Species designated pale burrowers. Catchy, Ronan said. I ignored him and kept going. Pale burrowers are blind subterranean humanoid predators with elongated forelimbs, reinforced shoulders, powerful torsos, and claws adapted for rapid excavation through packed dirt, root systems, and soft limestone. Dentition indicates tearing and stripping rather than crushing. Colony structure confirmed. Ronan leaned his elbows on the table. How big a colony? I scanned lower. Estimated tunnel network spans the entire farm and surrounding acreage. Current projection puts the system at over 1,000 acres with multiple vertical shafts and feeding routes. Good gosh almighty, Ronan said. Yeah. I flipped to the next page and read more slowly because this part really mattered. Primary senses are not visual. Burrowers track movement through ground vibration, pressure shifts, and acute hearing. Recon noted immediate aggression toward artificial light. Despite blindness, they are highly sensitive to illumination and will converge on visible light sources quickly and in numbers. So, we're doing this in the dark. Near total darkness, I said. No flashlights. Also, no guns unless we really need to. They have an incredible sense of hearing. None of that bothered me. My eyes worked at night as well as they did in the daylight. Better once the sun was gone, actually. Underground would be easier on me than it would be for most people. I could see what little there was to see, hear what was moving, smell blood, dirt, and everything of the sort. I tapped the paper. Not a problem on my end. Night vision's fine. Hearing's better than fine. And smell will help if the tunnels split too much. Ronan looked offended in a theatrical way. On your end? That's cute. I looked up. What? He pointed at himself with both thumbs. Grizzly nose. Better than a bloodhound. Although almost nobody knows that. Not a little bit better either, a lot better. If there's anything down there with a pulse, a den, a nest, a wound, or a bad attitude, I'll smell it. Everything down there is going to have a bad attitude. I went back to the file. Recon believes colony is controlled by a brood queen. Large reproductive organism located deep within central chamber. Queen likely immobile or near immobile. Workers transport food and offspring through the tunnel system. Elimination of queen expected to destabilize or terminate colony functionality. Ronan nodded once. So, this whole thing is a bug nest with claws. Close enough. I kept reading until I hit the section marked weaknesses. Cranial destruction effective. Fire strongly recommended for larval chambers and reproductive target. Burrowers display coordinated pack response, but limited higher reasoning outside immediate hunt behavior. Larger specimens observed by recon may serve as guards or heavy workers. Ronan drummed his fingers on the table. Anything about why they're in Kansas? I skimmed the rest of the page and shook my head. Nothing solid, just that they've never been recorded this far west before. Which means either they moved or somebody drove them. Or we've all been missing a giant underground nightmare for a long time. Those are all bad options. I set the report down for a second, thinking through the job. 1,000 acres of farm and field over a tunnel network full of blind predators that could hear a heartbeat and would rush any light source. You would have to go in quiet, stay low, and kill fast when quiet stopped being an option. Ronan tilted his head. You're doing the thing where you make a plan and don't tell me the plan because you enjoy being so mysterious. I'm doing the thing where I'm thinking. Looks like it hurts. I picked the file back up. We'll drive my car. We get into town by daylight, find a hotel, black out the room, sleep through the day, and hit the farm after sunset. Makes sense. We go in dark. No lights unless we're forced. Ronan tipped his head side to side, considering it. I can scout if it gets too tight. The smaller forms, fox, coyote, bat, whatever fits. Do that if you need to. He smiled a little. Or I can borrow some extra visual tools. Oh, don't start. You brought up senses first. I stated facts. I've got good eyes in the dark. So do I. Watch this. And then his eyes changed. 1 second they were normal, human enough if you ignored everything else about them. The next second the pupils drew in sharp and vertical, the whole look of them going cold and wrong in a way that hit some instinct in the back of my skull. I jerked in my chair before I could stop it. Ronan barked a laugh. Snake eyes. My night vision won't be a problem. I can see heat signatures. He blinked and they went back to normal. You're an asshole. I'm adaptable. You're lucky those aren't mutually exclusive. You jumped. I did not jump. Jake, you absolutely did. You flashed snake eyes at me from 3 feet away. Anybody would react. I closed the folder and stood up. The game was over whether he'd won the hand or not. Pack what you need. Weapons, spare clothes, etc. You know where my weapon room is. Ronan rose from his chair and grabbed the second cooler by the handle. You really know how to make a trip sound romantic. Kansas farm, underground colony, total darkness, screaming queen at the end. What more do you want? Honestly, a less disgusting opener than Family Massacre. For a second, neither of us said anything. The file sat on the table between the cards and the empty blood bag, and then Ronan nodded once, all joking gone for the moment. We'll kill him. That's the plan. I gathered the blood bags and tucked the folder under my arm. Outside, the last sound of the outfit's engines was long gone. The property was quiet again. It never stayed that way for long. Kansas was a night's drive. The farm would still be there when we arrived. The tunnels would be waiting under it, and so would the things that made them. And somewhere down under all that dirt, packed under 1,000 acres of open land, there was a queen laying monsters. And we were going to burn her alive. Kansas at night is all distance. The road cuts through open dark with fields on both sides and the occasional fence line flashing past in the headlights. I drive with one hand on the wheel while the engine hums steady under the car and the miles slide past. Ronan has his boots up on the dash until I tell him to move them. He doesn't. I tell him again. He sighs like I've ruined his evening and finally drops them to the floor. For a while, neither of us says much. The file sits in the cup holder between us. We've both already seen the photos, no reason to look at them again. The headlights stretch out across the highway and the road keeps pulling us west. After a few minutes, Ronan glances over at me. How long you been a vampire? I keep my eyes on the road. Near a decade. Seriously? Yeah. Huh. I figured way longer from the crabby attitude. Good to know. You walk around like you're 200 years old and annoyed all the time. How long have you been whatever the hell you are? That's rude. You'll live. He looks out the passenger window for a moment before answering. 15 years. Maybe a little more. That long? Yeah, started in old Navajo country. Out in bumfuck nowhere. No neighbors, no town worth mentioning. Just desert, rock, and coyotes yelling at the moon. One night I hear banging at the door, real desperate pounding. Thought maybe somebody got lost or drunk. Turns out the guy was half dead. Animal attack? That's what it looked like. Older Navajo man. Shoulder ripped open, leg torn up, blood everywhere. He collapsed right on my porch before he even got a full sentence out. So you helped him. You sound surprised. A little. I do good deeds occasionally. Don't go spreading that around, though. Dragged him inside, cleaned the wounds, did what I could to keep him alive. Guy was tough. Took a few days, but he pulled through. And before he left, he thanked me. Said a few things in Navajo I didn't understand, and then he put his hand on my chest and blessed me. Blessed you. That's the word he used. And you thought nothing of it? Not a damn thing. Figured it was a cultural thing. Spiritual thank you or something. He walked off into the woods and I went back to my life. Couple of days later I go out hunting. I had a ritual back then. Every time I killed something, I cut out a small piece of the heart and eat it raw. Why? Respect for the animal. Taking in its life? Old habit I picked up somewhere, did it for years. And this time? This time it went wrong. Shot a mule deer, a big one. Dropped it clean. Cut the chest open, took a bite of the heart like always, and... He pauses. And my body immediately started tearing itself apart. I glance over and define apart. Every bone breaking. One after another. That makes me wince a little. Started in my hands. Fingers snapped first, then the wrists, I could hear the bones splitting, some fusing. The elbows went next, then my shoulders. It kept climbing, ribs cracking in my chest like somebody stepping on dry sticks. My spine bent so hard I hit the ground before I even knew it. Vertebrae popped and reset in one at a time. Jeez. He rubs the back of his neck like he can still feel it. Skin started splitting in places, muscles pushing out under it, fur coming in patches. My face stretched, my teeth changed, and then antlers punched out of my skull. Antlers? Full rack. You ever grow bone through your forehead? I don't recommend it. I'll keep that in mind. Couldn't talk, couldn't think straight either, hurt too much. Once the change finished, I wasn't really me anymore. What were you? The deer I ate. Took 5 nights before I turned back. 5. First morning I thought I was stuck like that forever. Couldn't use my hands, couldn't speak. Just hiding in the woods, trying not to gore myself on branches. Sounded like a curse. I thought it was one. Man, boy was it rough. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Killed another animal, ate the heart, changed again. Different form that time. Oh, I was testing it out. Rabbit, coyote, hawk. Every new heart gave me something different. Took a long time to learn how to control, though. Then I got stupid. First grizzly was in Colorado. Big male causing trouble near a campground. I killed it and I ate the heart. You lost control, didn't you? Badly. Next thing I remember is waking up with tranq darts sticking out of me, half a town wrecked. 5 people injured, 2 dead. Is that when the outfit found you? Yep. They trained me, locked me in a concrete room, and told me I had 2 choices. Work for them or die there. Easy decision. Very. Animal hearts weren't cut anymore, anyway. Human hearts keep the strength up. Outfit supplies them. Ethically sourced, they say. I do jobs for them and everybody stays happy. The sky ahead of us starts to lighten a little as we reach the small town from the file. A water tower appears first, then a few scattered buildings along a main quiet street. A diner with dark windows, a hardware store, a gas station with 2 pumps and nobody there. The sheriff's office sits at the corner looking like an old brick building somebody stuck a badge on. Real lively. People here are either asleep or pretending nothing happened. The farmhouse sits a few miles outside town. The road turns to dirt as we approach the property. A county cruiser waits at the gate with the lights off. A deputy leans against it smoking a cigarette he doesn't seem to be enjoying. I pull up and shut off the engine. The deputy looks over. "You the cleanup guys?" "Something like that." He flicks ash into the dirt. "The sheriff says you're allowed through. Also says I never saw you." "Smart sheriff," Ronan says. The deputy nods towards the house. I drive through the gate and follow the dirt lane towards the farmhouse. The house sits alone in the middle of the land with a red barn off to one side and fields stretching out in every direction. From a distance, it almost looks peaceful. Up close, it's a different story. The porch railing is splintered, one window shattered, the front door hangs slightly open. Ronan gets out first and stands still for a moment, nose working. I step out of the car and the smell hits me immediately. Blood. Old now, dried into wood and soil and cloth, but still thick enough to sit in the air. Under it I catch dirt, livestock, gasoline from farm equipment, and something deeper. something decaying underground. Inside the house, the damage is worse than the photo showed. Bloodstains cover the kitchen floor, cabinets are clawed open, the table's overturned. I move through the rooms while Ronan follows behind me. The living room floor is gouged with deep claw marks. Near the fireplace, the wood has collapsed inward slightly. I crouch and run my hand over the splintered boards. They came up through here, I say. More than one, Ronan replies. Yeah. Drag marks run from the living room through the hall and out the back door. Outside, the tracks cut across the dirt yard toward the barn before turning out into the field. I follow them until the ground changes. The grass gives way to disturbed soil. Tunnel openings dot the field in dark circles about 3 feet wide. Some are clustered together and others spread out across the land. There are dozens of them and probably more that we can't even see. Ronan crouches near one and takes a deep breath through his nose. Yeah, this is bad. How bad? He stands and scans the field. Big colony. Bigger than the reports say. They're under almost all of this, it feels like. I listen carefully. At first, there's only wind moving through the field and the barn creaking somewhere behind us. Then I hear it. Dirt shifting, not in one place but everywhere, movement underground. I step closer to one of the holes and something explodes out of it. The pale burrower launches itself at my chest in a blur of claws and teeth. I move before it reaches me. I grab its arm and redirect the momentum while driving my knife up through the inner side of its jaw and into the brain. The body slams into me anyway. I shove it away and let it hit the dirt. Ronan laughs once. Well, that answers one question. I crouch beside the corpse. Up close, it's even worse. Skin pale enough to look unfinished. No eyes at all, just sealed flesh where sockets should be. The shoulders are thick with digging muscle and the hands end in long hooked claws packed with dirt. I pull back its lip with the knife. Rows of narrow, tearing teeth. Not built for chewing, Ronan says. Built for stripping meat, I reply. I stand and scan the field again. Dozens of holes. A whole family dead. Recon barely scratched the surface. Then I spotted out in the field. One opening bigger than the others, wider and deeper. The dirt around it is heavily disturbed. I point with the knife. There. Ronan follows my eyes. Primary round. Probably leads deeper than the rest. Probably leads to their friends, too. Yeah, a lot of them. The sky is starting to brighten behind the barn. Not full daylight yet, but close enough that I can feel it creeping closer. I look across the field one more time. The tunnels, the farmhouse. The big entrance waiting out in the dirt. We know where we're going tonight. Ronan peers into the nearest hole and grins. Good. I was starting to think Kansas might be boring. We did exactly what we said we were going to do, even though neither of us really liked the idea of leaving the farm untouched for an entire day while whatever lived under that land kept it moving through those tunnels. We drove back into town, found the only motel that looked like it still accepted cash without questions, and took a room on the far end of the building where nobody would bother us. I drank another blood bag, and Ronan finished the last of the hearts the outfit had left him, and within minutes, the room went quiet as we both crashed for the day like two predators waiting for night to come back around. When I woke again, the room was completely dark, the way I like it. For a moment, I could hear Ronan breathing on the other bed across the room and the low hum of the motel air conditioner rattling through the wall unit. Outside, night had settled back over the plains and the sun was finally gone. That was all the invitation I needed. We packed up without much conversation, loaded the gear back into the car, and drove the empty road out toward the farmhouse again with the black sky above the clouds and the land quiet. Ronan and I went to the largest hole that we spotted earlier. The smell rising out of it was stronger now. Wet soil mixed with the stink of blood and meat. Whatever lived down there seems to have been feeding well. "Ready?" Ronan asked. "As I'll ever be," I said, and then I dropped into the tunnel. The descent was tight and steep for the first few yards, the dirt packed hard and smooth from constant use. After about 10 feet, the tunnel widened enough for both of us to move comfortably, and the last of the moonlight disappeared behind us. Darkness swallowed everything. That was fine with me. My eyes adjusted quickly, and the world resolved itself into shades of gray and shadow that were more than enough to navigate by. Ronan took a step beside me and sniffed the air. "You know, this might be the first time in history a vampire has willingly crawled into a hole with another monster." "Focus," I said. "Oh, I'm focused all right. I'm just saying, if bats start flying around down here, it's gonna look very on brand for you." I glanced at him. "You gonna turn into one?" He grinned. "Funny you should ask." His body shifted almost immediately, bones tightening inward with a series of small pops as his frame shrank. Fur spread across his arms, his face pulled forward, and within seconds, the man standing next to me had collapsed into the small, leathery shape of a bat clinging to the tunnel wall. He hung there for a second, wings twitching. We looked at each other, then I nodded at him, and he pushed off the wall and disappeared down the tunnel in a flutter of silent wings. I moved forward alone while he scouted ahead. The tunnels twisted constantly, branching off in narrow passages that split and curved through the packed earth like veins. The ground under my boots felt hollow in places where other tunnels ran beneath or beside the one I was in. Every few yards I stopped and listened, letting the sounds of the underground world sort themselves out in my head. Dirt shifting somewhere far off, scratching, claws echoing through the walls. Movement that traveled in bursts and then stopped again. The first bone pile appeared around a bend in the tunnel. It looked exactly like what it was. A feeding spot where the burrowers had dragged prey down from the surface and stripped it clean. Animal bones mixed with human remains lay scattered across the floor, cracked and gnawed until there was nothing left worth taking deeper into the nest. The smell there was thick enough to make the air feel heavy in my lungs. I stepped over the bones and continued on. Ronan had fluttered back toward me a minute later and landed on the tunnel wall before shifting back into human form. The change took longer this time, bones stretching and reforming as his body expanded back into its normal shape. "They're everywhere. Small groups mostly. Workers, maybe." "How close?" "Close enough that you better keep the knife ready." The first group hit us less than 30 seconds later. 3 pale shapes rushed out of a side tunnel in complete silence until their claws scraped the dirt. I don't know how my ears or Ronan's didn't pick them up. I stepped forward and cut the first one across the throat before it could scream. Ronan grabbed the second and slammed its skull against the tunnel wall hard enough to break it. The third one tried to scramble past us, but my knife caught the back of its neck and dropped it in the dirt. Even without shape shifting into another form, Ronan was stronger than me, physically at least. I, of course, was faster. We stood still after the fight, listening. More movement echoed through the tunnels, but it stayed distant. Quiet fights were our only advantage down here. Loud ones would bring the entire colony. We moved deeper. Egg pits started appearing in the side chambers after another few turns in the tunnel system. Clusters of pale larvae squirmed and shallow depressions dug into the dirt while half-grown burrowers moved around them like ants tending a nest. The smell coming off those pits was worse than the bone piles. We avoided them when we could and killed anything that got too close. The tunnels continued branching and curving downward until the air grew warmer and thicker, a sign that we were moving deeper into the colony. Ronan shifted into a bat several more times to scout ahead while I navigated by sound and smell, picking routes that seemed to lead toward the densest movement below us. The ambush came when the tunnel finally opened into a wider chamber. I heard them before I saw them, dozens of claws scraping against dirt at once. A wave of bodies rushing through multiple tunnels that emptied into the same space. Pale shapes poured into the chamber from every direction, drawn by the vibrations of the earlier fights we hadn't managed to keep quiet enough. "Here we go," Ronan muttered. He didn't hesitate. His body expanded violently as he shifted, bones cracking outward as muscle and fur exploded across his frame. Within seconds, the tunnel chamber barely contained the massive bulk of a grizzly bear where Ronan had once been standing. The first burrower that reached him disappeared under a swipe of claws that tore it apart in a spray of pale blood. The rest came faster. I moved through them like a knife through water, striking throats, skulls, and spines as quickly as my body could carry me. Speed was the only way for me to survive a swarm like that. Ronan had pure, brute, animalistic strength. Every second I slowed down meant claws tearing into me from 3 directions at once. Even moving that fast wasn't enough to avoid all of them. One of the burrowers caught my side with his claws as it rushed past. Another raked my shoulder before I could finish it. The wounds burned immediately and slowly began to heal. Ronan's bare form crushed bodies against the tunnel walls while I cut through anything that slipped past him. The chamber filled with the sounds of snapping bones and tearing flesh until finally the rush of bodies slowed. The last burrower collapsed under my blade, and the tunnel went quiet again except for our breathing. Ronan shifted back into human form, breathing hard as he wiped blood from his arms. "You look like hell," he said, nodding toward my side, noticing my ribs that weren't quite healing up. "I've looked worse," I replied, though the blood loss was already starting to make itself known. Don't kid yourself in all these vampire movies and TV shows the kids watch nowadays. Vampires do need their blood. Beyond the chamber, another tunnel sloped downward, wider than any we had seen so far. I listened for a moment and heard something different far below us. Movement on a much larger scale. I pointed toward the descending tunnel. "That's the direction," I said. Ronan looked down the passage and nodded slowly. "Queen's gotta be somewhere down there." I wiped my knife on the dirt and stepped toward the deeper tunnels. "Then let's go meet her." The tunnel beyond the swarm chamber dropped at a steeper angle than anything we had followed so far, and the deeper Ronan and I went, the more the whole colony seemed to gather itself around us. The walls were smoother down here, not naturally but from use, from bodies scraping past over and over again until the dirt had been worn down into hard, curved surfaces that caught every sound and threw it forward. I could hear them even when I couldn't see them. Workers moving through side passages, larvae stirring in pits somewhere below, claws scratching through dirt, bodies dragging prey or each other or fresh young deeper into the nest. The whole place felt organized in a way I didn't like. My side still burned where the swarm had torn me open. My shoulder had stiffened enough that every movement of my left arm came with a sharp reminder that I was already running on borrowed time. I needed blood, and I needed it soon. I could feel the blood loss in my small delays, in the fraction of a second it took my body to answer, and I hated that more than the pain. "You still with me?" Ronan asked. "Enough to kill a queen," I told him. "I need blood, and I'm gonna need it soon. I took quite a few wounds in that last fight, and it's getting harder to heal." Ronan nodded. The passage widened, then widened again, and a few steps later the walls on either side fell away completely. I stopped at the lip of the opening and lifted a hand to hold Ronan in place. The space below us was so large it took a second for my eyes to settle on the scale of it. The den spread beneath us in a vast bowl of churned earth and exposed stone, its ceiling lost high above in roots and jagged dark curves, its floor broken up by mounds of bones and dozens of breeding pits cut into the dirt. There were animal skeletons everywhere, Cattle skulls, deer antlers, long white ribs, vertebra, jaws. And mixed in among them, some were human bones as well. Enough of them to turn my stomach if I let myself think about the numbers. Some of the piles had been there a long time. Others were fresh enough to still carry strips of meat and hair. Between those pale heaps, the larva pits moved. The workers didn't seem to possess the same amount of strength and the proper senses that every other pale burrower that we came across. Those must have been the guards, the soldiers, the soldier ants, if you will. These other ones were just workers. Mindful drones set about basic tasks. They barely paid us any mind. Each pit was full of pale, segmented young, folding over each other in wet clusters while workers paced around them carrying fresh larvae from one place to another in their arms. They had a mechanical urgency that made the whole chamber feel even more wrong. And in the center of everything, planted in the middle of the den like the foul heart of it, sat the brood queen. She was so large that I could hardly accept it. The upper portion of her still held some warped trace of the species around her, but below the rib cage, she became a swollen, obscene mass of pale flesh spread across the chamber floor in a mound of pulsing tissue and stretched skin. Veins thick as my wrist moved under her surface. Her torso spasmed with contractions that rolled through her body in ugly, visible waves, and every few seconds it was as if another larva slid free from the lower bulk of her into the mud at the blood at her base, where workers rushed in to collect it and carry it away before the next one dropped. She couldn't have stood if she wanted to. She was too large to move, too heavy with her own function. A breeding engine buried underground and fed by everything the colony could drag down to her. Her head turned toward us. There were no eyes in her face, only sealed flesh pulled tight over bone. But she didn't need eyes. She felt us enter the chamber and raised her head with a slow, horrible awareness that made the skin along my neck tighten. Then her mouth opened, wider than anything that belonged on a humanoid body, and she screamed. The sound came out wet and layered and sharp enough to cut through the chamber from wall to wall. It hit the piles of bone, the stone, the ceiling, the pits, and came back at us from every direction. The guards around her answered first, the little soldier drones. There were 6 that I could see immediately, all of them circling the queen in tightening arcs. They were much larger than the workers, broader across the shoulders, heavier through the torso, their backs ridged with dark plates of hardened bone that looked almost armored. Their arms were too long and too muscular, their claws darker and thicker, built for tearing through anything that they needed to. They moved with more control, too. They stayed close to the queen and listened. Ronan stood beside me and let a breath out through his nose. That is one of the worst things I've ever seen. Yeah, I said, keeping my eyes on the guards. We kill those first. He looked at the queen, then back at the 6 larger shapes moving around her. Fast strike. Fast and hard. Once we open this up, quiet doesn't matter anymore. That earned a grin from him. Finally. I slipped the knife back into its sheath and drew both pistols. The weight settled into my hands like muscle memory and certainty. I had 50 rounds total between them and had no intention of wasting any. I still had 2 sonic grenades clipped to my belt, an accelerant packed for the queen in the larva pits once we got close enough to use it. This was the chamber. This was the center. Every quiet move we had made in the tunnels had been for this moment. And down here, there was no reason to hold back anymore. Try not to shoot me, Ronan said. Try not to stand where I'm aiming. Good enough. Then he shifted. And then he charged. Every head in the den turned toward him at once. I moved with him, not beside him but around the edge, cutting a line down the chamber wall while he took the center like a battering ram. The first guard launched from a bone mound on the left with both claws extended, fast enough that a human would have no chance to adjust. I fired twice before it crossed the space between us. The first round smashed through its cheek and snapped its head sideways. The second punched into the skull just above the jaw hinge and dropped it in the dirt before its momentum was gone. It slid across the chamber floor and disappeared under the feet of the workers flooding in behind it. Ronan hit the second guard head on, and the force of it shook loose dirt from the ceiling. For a split second, both bodies vanished in a spray of bone shards and earth. Then the bear came up on top of it with his jaws locked around its shoulder and ripped sideways hard enough to tear the whole limb free. The guard shrieked and slashed at his face, but Ronan answered by lifting one paw and bringing it down across the thing's skull with enough strength to flatten the head into the ground. The sound of the impact cracked through the chamber over the queen screaming. Workers came in from all sides after that, pale bodies pouring through side passages and over bone piles, some of them carrying larvae until they dropped them and joined the rush. I ran the outer ring of the chamber and fired on the move, each pistol bucking in my hands as I put rounds through mouths, throats, and skulls, never stopping, never planting my feet long enough to get pinned. Always stay off the X. The trick in a fight like that wasn't strength. It was angles and speed and staying in the half second between where they thought you were and where you actually ended up. One leaped at me from behind a rib pile and I caught it in the mouth with the left pistol, then turned and put another round through the temple of the worker coming up at my right leg. Two more rushed together from a larva pit. I ducked, broke the other's knee with a shot on instinct, then finished them both before they hit the ground. The next two guards came for me as a pair, and they were smarter than the workers. They split wide without hesitation, forcing me to commit to one side or the other while they tried to close from both angles. I cut hard right, fired into the nearest one's knee to buckle it, then used that hitch in its charge to blur past the second guard and put 3 fast rounds into the back of its skull at near point-blank range. It dropped instantly, but the first one still had enough speed left to slam into me from the side. We hit the dirt together and its claws tore straight across my ribs, opening my side up wider than it already was. Pain flashed hot and white through my body. I drove the barrel of the left pistol up under its jaw and fired. The top of its head came apart over my shoulder. I shoved it off and got back to my feet with blood already running warm down my side. By then the chamber had fully broken open. Gunfire snapped and echoed through the den. Workers screamed and collided with each other in the rush. The queen kept shrieking all over it, every contraction seeming to throw more larvae into the muck at her base. And in the middle of that chaos, Ronan was a force all by himself. Seeing him fight in grisly form that close never really stops being impressive. It's not just the size, it's what he does with it. The bear moved through that chamber with a kind of brutal certainty, meeting force with more force and never once giving ground he didn't choose to give. When a cluster of workers rushed him from the right, he turned into them and hit with one shoulder, sending bodies tumbling across the chamber floor. One of the guards got onto his back and buried both claws deep into his fur, and Ronan rose up onto his hind legs with the thing hanging there, huge enough in that posture to dominate everything around him, then hurled himself backward into a stone outcrop until the guard burst between him and the wall. He came down again on all fours, already moving, jaws red, shoulders slick with blood, and tore through 3 workers in a straight line before they had time to scatter, batting one into a larva pit so hard it disappeared under the writhing young, crushing another under a forepaw, then turning his head and taking the third by the spine in his jaws. That gave me the opening I needed to dive deeper toward the queen. 2 guards still remained near her lower mass, both larger than the rest, both built heavier through the back and shoulders with thick ridge plating running from the neck down the spine. One came at me across the edge of a larva pit and I emptied 4 rounds into its chest before it even reacted. The shots barely slowed it. It hit me like a dropped engine block and sent me skidding through mud, blood, and larval slime with both pistols still barely in my hands. It came down on top of me with both claws, and I got my forearms up just in time to keep one from opening my throat. The other punched through my sleeve and carved deep into the muscle underneath. I twisted, jammed the muzzle of the right pistol into the seam under its jaw, and fired twice. The guard convulsed and dropped across me. It took more effort than I liked to kick that weight off and get up again. I could feel the blood now running from my side and my arm both, enough that the hunger stirred hard in the back of my throat, sharp and ugly and looking for a way in. I shoved it down. I also noticed how reluctant these wounds were to close, some of them half open. There was no room for anything except the fight. The last guard belonged to Ronan. It met him near the front edge of the Queen's bulk where the ground had become slick with fluids and blood. Bigger than the others, heavier through the forelimbs, mean enough to stand its ground even with a charging grizzly. It slashed across Ronan's snout and chest as it collided and opened dark lines through the fur. But Ronan never slowed. He drove into it with all his weight and forced both of them sideways into the Queen's flank hard enough to shake her body and make her scream loud enough to rattle the chamber. The guard clawed at his face again. Ronan answered by biting down on his head. There was one solid crunch, and then the fight was over. The moment that last guard died, the shape of the battle changed. The workers didn't stop coming, but they lost whatever backbone the guards had given them. Everything left in the chamber was smaller, weaker, and frantic. Dangerous in numbers, but disorganized now. No longer anchored to anything except instinct. I grabbed the accelerant from my harness and hurled it towards the Queen's underside while I ripped the sonic grenade free and sent it into the thickest knot of workers pouring out from the nearest pits. The detonation hit the chamber with a brutal pulse of sound. The closest burrowers spasmed instantly, clutching at their heads, shrieking as their senses overloaded all at once. Several dropped straight into the pits convulsing. Others staggered blind into each other, rolling in the mud and bones. I used the opening and sprinted straight toward the Queen. Up close, she was worse than anything I'd seen from the lip of the chamber. Her skin pulsed visibly with movement underneath it. Fluids ran down from her lower body into the dirt beneath in thick pale ropes while fresh larvae slid free and twitching wet bursts and hit the ground squirming. The smell was suffocating. Hot and rotten and animal. The concentrated stink of a thing built only to consume and reproduce. I fired both pistols into her upper torso as I ran, muzzle flashes strobing across pale flesh, black blood spraying in heavy bursts where the round stuck. It was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. She was too big for bullets to do anything except piss her off. Ronan reached me with a lighter already in his hand. Move! I cracked open the second canister of accelerant and emptied it across her lower body and into the nearest larva pits, soaking flesh, mud, and nests all at once. Larvae writhed in it. Workers slipped in it trying to reach us. Then Ronan dropped the flame. Fire took the Queen in a single violent sheet. It ran over her body immediately, racing across the accelerant, climbing her swollen mass, pouring into the larva pits in bright, hungry waves. Her scream hit hard enough that I felt it in my teeth. She convulsed against the chamber floor with enough force to shake the bone piles apart. Burning workers stumbled through the nest and spread the flames further as they died, setting more pits alight, turning the entire den into a field of fire and screaming. The Queen thrashed harder. She couldn't rise, but she didn't need to. The sheer violence of her body bucking against the chamber floor shook the entire nest. Veins burst beneath her skin. Parts of her lower mass split open under the heat, spilling fire and burning tissue into the mud. Larvae roasted in their pits with wet crackling sounds while workers ran blind through smoke and sound and flame. Then the ceiling cracked. Not a small shift, a real split. A line opened overhead and dirt stayed pouring down in sheets. One of the larger bone mounds collapsed inward. Workers vanished under it. Another section of ceiling gave way near the far wall and sent stone and earth crashing through the outer edge of the chamber. Ronan looked up once, then back at me. "That's our cue." He didn't have to say it twice. Behind us, the queen was still alive, still screaming, still writhing in the fire. But she was finished. So was her nest. "Let's go." And we ran for the tunnel while the den came apart behind us. The queen's death scream followed us into the tunnel. Ronan and I were already running when the first section of the den collapsed behind us, the sound rolling through the earth like distant thunder. Fire had taken the nest fast, and the queen's thrashing had shaken the entire chamber apart. Now the tunnels were falling with it. Dirt rained from the ceiling in thick clumps as we sprinted uphill through the passage we had used to reach the chamber. The ground shook under my boots with every collapse echoing behind us, and the air filled with dust and smoke drifting up from the burning nest. A dying colony is still a dangerous one, though. My side had become a real problem. The guard that tore it open near the queen had widened the wound badly enough that every stride pulled at it, my skin healing and ripping, draining me with every step. Blood had soaked through my shirt and into my jacket. I could feel the weakness creeping in now, a slight delay between what I wanted my body to do and what it actually did. My shoulder was stiff, my forearm burned, and my breathing grew heavier than I liked. "You're slowing down." "I'm aware." Behind us, claws scraped through the tunnel again. The burrowers hadn't all died in the fire. Some of them were still running. The passage split ahead into 3 forks, each one bending away into blackness. I stopped just long enough to listen, trying to separate the sounds of the collapsing tunnels from the movement of the creatures chasing behind us. Ronan sniffed the air once. "Left," he said, and we took it. The tunnel twisted sharply and dipped lower before climbing again. Dirt slid from the ceiling and forced us to duck as we ran. Behind us, the scraping of claws got louder as the survivors of the colony picked up our trail. Then the tunnel ended. A wall of packed soil and stone blocked the way entirely. "Great," I muttered. Behind us, the burrowers were getting close. Ronan shifted instantly. His body shrank inward, bones tightening and folding until the man beside me was gone and a bat clung to the wall instead. Then he launched down the tunnel we had just come through. I drew both pistols and took position at the bend, forcing anything chasing us to come through the narrow turn first. The first burrower rounded the corner seconds later. I put a round through its skull and dropped it before it had time to leap. Another came right behind it and caught a bullet through the throat. A third lunged low, and I stepped aside and fired through the back of its head as it passed. More claws scraped closer. My side throbbed harder with every heartbeat. Ronan returned in a blur of wings and expanded back into human form. "Oh, the fork, air moving up there. Lead." We ran. The tunnel we took climbed sharply but split constantly, branching into smaller passages that could have led anywhere into the colony. Twice we took wrong turns and had to double back while the ceiling cracked above us and dirt poured into the tunnel behind. Every delay gave the burrowers more time to close the distance. The final stretch angled steeply upward and the dirt underfoot kept sliding loose as the tunnels continued to fall. Roots tore free from the ceiling and the air shifted, carrying the cold smell of open night with it. That alone was enough to push me harder despite the blood loss. A circle of moonlight appeared ahead. We scrambled the last few feet and burst out of the tunnel into the open Kansas field. Cold air hit my face. Behind us, the ground shook again. A long section of the field collapsed inward as the tunnels beneath it finally gave way. The earth folded into itself in a chain of sinkholes that rolled across the farmland until the movement finally settled. The colony was buried. Ronan looked back at the ruined field. "That should do it." I pulled my phone out and typed the message. "Queen destroyed. Colony collapsed. Send cleanup." The message sent. The eastern horizon was already starting to lighten. Dawn was coming. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and started walking toward the road where we had left the car. Hotel, blackout curtains. I'm sleeping for a day. Ronan fell into step beside me and grinned. You always say the sweetest things after a massacre. Shut up and walk. We crossed the quiet field, while the first edge of dawn crept slowly over the Kansas horizon behind us. One night, I was heading home for a late night at work. My car was still in the shop, so I took the bus home. I was thankfully able to get the last bus. Besides the driver, I was the only one on it. My week of taking overtime shifts finally caught up to me, and I started to drift off to sleep, unable to help myself. I promised I would only let my eyes rest until the next stop. Within seconds, I was completely asleep. A small ding came above my head that caused me to jerk awake. I thought it was the sound of the bus. I looked around in a daze, trying to place where I was. I should have been on the bus. Light flooded in through small windows on the sides, and a smell of rot filled my nose. I slightly gagged as my mind slowly adjusted to the place. Instead of sitting in the last bus on the way home, I was sitting in an aisle seat on a plane. A plane? I haven't been on a plane in my entire life. I owned a passport, but that still didn't explain how I woke up on a plane. I didn't often dream, and this was far too real. In silent, frantic fear, I turned my head to ask the person sitting next to me what the hell was going on when my words died in my throat. The man next to me was clearly dead. My heart was beating out of my chest. Nothing made sense. I was too scared to move. I could only look past the man into the woman sitting next to the window, who was also looking as pale as the grave. My mind stopped working in that moment. A pair of flight attendants walked over to the front of the aisle. I didn't notice until they started to speak and go over the safety measures every flight has. A chipper voice finally made my head turn to watch their routine. Hello, darling dead ones. We'll be your flight attendants for this flight. Since this plane has a 0 chance of crashing, this talk may be a bit different than most. But let us introduce ourselves first, because you'll be spending a lot of time with us. My name is Nettie, and this wonderful lady is... The taller male flight attendant spoke, then paused to gesture towards his female partner with a smile plastered over his face. The girl was wearing the same uniform as him, only with a skirt, and had an exhausted look on her face. Bodhi, she said, as if she couldn't care less. Still full of enthusiasm, the man kept speaking. We'll do our best to make sure you are all comfortable on this flight. Just ask. We've modeled this plane to be like the ones you've been on while you were alive. Very comforting, right? We even have those masks that drop down in case of emergencies, but you'll never need to use them. You're all not breathing, but we do let the masks drop for fun, Nettie said, his wide smile never fading. This man was made for customer service. Super fun, Bodhi added in a monotone voice. We have drinks and those little peanuts for you to look at. All such fun. If you ever need us, please press the button for a little ring-a-ding. Ring-a-ding, Bodhi added with a massive sigh. We're here to help with anything. Does anyone have any questions so far? The bright smile was still on his face as he raised his hand as if he was the one asking a question. Nettie waited a few seconds to look over the dead silent group he was addressing. To my horror, some of them were shuffling around stiffly, each with dead, milky eyes and slightly looking decomposed. Myself and the flight attendants were the only ones who looked alive in that plane. I finally shot my hand up for him to notice. With an even brighter smile, he spotted me. Oh, terrific! We've never had one of those before. A question! Nettie said in a happy tone. I like your presentation, but what if I'm not dead and shouldn't be here? I asked, voice trembling. The smile almost faded from his face. Some of the dead tried to turn their heads towards me, but soon forgot I was even there and looked blindly in front of them. Hurrying over, the flight attendant stopped in front of my chair and got low so we could see eye to eye. His kind face almost made me forget what kind of situation I was in. I stared at him, now able to see clearer. For some reason, I wasn't wearing my contacts. It wasn't a big deal. After a few feet, some things were a bit fuzzy. When I first looked at the pair, I thought something was off about them. With him being so close, I now saw what it was. His hair wasn't hair, but silver feathers coming from his head. My mouth dropped open at the strange new sight, nearly making me shut down. "You poor little thing. You must have had a sudden death and didn't realize," Nettie explained. I nearly fainted. My heart was beating. How was I dead? Did the bus crash in my sleep? What happened and how did I get here? He slipped a hand to my wrist with a caring expression on his face. "We'll just check your pulse to prove..." His words were suddenly cut off as his eyes grew wide. His mouth clamped shut and I heard an odd humming coming from him. It took me a few seconds to realize he was muffling in his own screams. Yanking me to my feet, the skinny man started to haul me down the aisle, his body moving stiffly as the corpses shuffled around us. "Why, yes, sir. You may see the washroom. I'll show you where it is. Let's keep walking this way." Nettie's voice was tense while still trying to sound cheerful. The dead eyes of the other passengers watched as I dragged past them. Nettie was narrating our slow trip. "Walking, walking, we are still walking." His voice was stressed, almost as if he was slightly singing. When we finally got into the small space where the attendants made the meals, he finally let my wrist go. Bodhi followed us, and a questioning look came over her face. She didn't understand why Nettie would drag a passenger back there. Her feathers were black and longer than Nettie's. She covered one half of her face with them, giving her a little bit of a goth look. She honestly appeared out of place in her uniform. "What's got your feathers all in a ruffle?" she asked, arms crossed. Instead of using his words, Nettie grabbed my wrist again in her hand. Pressing it against my skin, it took her a long minute to clue in what he was trying to show her. When she did, her eyes grew wide and feathers puffed up. Unable to accept what she was feeling, she pressed her ear to my chest to hear the frantic heartbeat. "He's alive?" she asked when she finally pulled away. "I know! Has this ever happened before?" Nettie chimed in, looking between her and myself. "Why are you asking me? You've done this job for longer." The entire thing was so strange I couldn't bring myself to interrupt their conversation. Pausing to think, Nettie nodded. He pulled out a notepad and peeled off a gold sticker to place on his partner's uniform. "A gold star observation." This was too weird to be real. I had to be dreaming or someone was playing a prank on me. To start with, their feathers needed to be fake. Reaching out, I didn't warn Nettie before I ran both hands through his feathers, trying to find where the headpiece or fake feathered wig started. The silver feathers felt softer and warmer than they looked. A panicked chirping sound made me pause, and I finally clued in that it was coming from him. I jerked my hands back, realizing that I'd done something really inappropriate to him. His pale face flushed as he tried to get his chirping under control. Bodhi gave me a very, not a cool move, dude, kind of look. "I'm sorry, I didn't think the feathers were real," I stammered. Nettie silently waved it off, saying it was all right. He wasn't collected enough to speak yet. Looking him over, I saw some details I had missed before. Their legs were far too skinny for them to be standing upright. Bodhi wore white long socks that ended at her ankles, with clawed feet looking as if they should belong to birds. Nettie had the same poking out from his uniform pants. Their hands had fingers that were unusually long and bony. Each of them had pale skin and gray eyes that almost glittered like silver. These two were not human, as hard as that was to accept. "So, what are you two?" I asked slowly. "Flight attendants," Nettie answered in a positive voice. "No, I mean, you're not human, right? Are you a weird bird hybrid? Did you hatch out of an egg or something?" In that moment, I needed to deal with the less weird facts first. After I figured out what these two were, I could move on to how I got there and what was going on. They both looked at each other, showing that they never considered the question before. I don't know, to be honest. We've just always been doing this. Do you think we even have parents? Nettie asked his partner, who just shrugged. Okay, so I wouldn't know what these two are. Then I guess I needed to focus on the next question of why I was on a plane full of dead people and how. From the looks of it so far, neither of them had that answer. As far as they could tell, anyone who ended up on this plane should be dead. Aside from each other, that is. Is there any way to get me home? I clearly shouldn't be here, I asked, hoping for a good answer. Well, this has never happened to me before, so I wouldn't know. This plane never lands. Because you're alive, I can't really explain the point of this flight or how it works. But it was made to stay in the air. We can't drop you off anywhere. The only thing I can think of is to ask Saudi about this. He's trained all of us and is like a father figure. Getting to him is going to be difficult, though. Nettie was trying to stay positive as he spoke. My bleak outlook dampened his cheerful personality a little. That wasn't a good sign. He mentioned getting to Saudi instead of talking to him. How was it possible to go somewhere else and not land? Was this person in a hard-to-reach spot on the plane? I was confused, so Nettie kept talking. We can move between planes. The issue is we need a feather from the pilot. He's a bit grumpy most days. I can ask him for help. I don't mind, but it might not turn out too great. He sounded nervous, but I was clinging to anything I could get. If we needed a feather, we were going to get a damn feather. How hard could it be? I would get on my hands and knees if needed. It sounded like something we could do if this pilot was anything like the pair in front of me. Please, let's go talk to him. I know he'll listen to reason, I begged. The two looked at each other. Bodhi shook her head with a nervous look on her face, but Nettie brightened up. He was going to do his best for me. At that moment, I wasn't aware of how far he would go. You are the passenger, and it's our job to make sure your flight is as pleasant as possible. Let's go talk to the pilot. The cockpit is on the other side of first class. Follow me, Mr. Actually, I don't know your name. I know the names of all the people who should be aboard, but I'm blanking on yours. Cooper, I told him quickly. I disliked my first name of Devin, so always went by my last name. I thought I heard a happy chirp from Nettie as he nodded and took my wrist again. I didn't need to be guided along, but he did so just in case. Bodhi let out a frustrated sigh and followed behind us. As we walked, I remembered how terrifying it was being on a plane full of the dead. Nettie was so pleasant he eased my fears a little, until I had to face rows and rows of dead people, each person showing clear signs of how they died. Each wore what they died in, instead of what they were buried in. Some were in hospital gowns, others in regular clothing soaked in dried blood. The smell wasn't overpowering, but it was enough, along with the sight of them, to nearly make me sick. As we walked past each person, they stared at us. It was as if they wanted something, or maybe they could see hints of the life they no longer had. In a few minutes that felt like forever, we came to a small, empty space beyond first class. I didn't know if all planes were set up in the same way. The door to the cockpit was closed tight. Nettie stopped in front but didn't knock yet. He looked over his shoulder at us, appearing a little nervous. I don't know how he'll react to someone alive on the plane, so try breathing as little as possible. Bodhi shoved me in a corner and stood in front, trying to hide me from view. Their actions were making me regret ever asking to come over to speak with the pilot. It was too late. Nettie knocked a few times and politely asked for the pilot to come out to speak with them. Black feathers nearly blocked my sight as I tried to keep my breathing as slow as possible. When the door opened, I nearly choked on my own fear. A massive creature far too big to fit inside the space, but yet somehow did, pushed itself from the open door. The entire body was a black mass made up of feathers. 2 large clawed hands hung from the side of the creature as its hands reached the ceiling to look down at the nervous Nettie. The face, which was nothing more than 2 glowing red eyes, locked onto him. Sir, I hate to bother you in the middle of a flight, but... His words were literally cut off as both hands shot out to wrap around poor Nettie's throat. He choked out a plea that went unheard by the pilot. The monster forced his thin body to the ground as his frail legs weakly kicked, trying to get free. I gasped and started to push forward, only to find out Bodhi was stronger than myself. I needed to do something before Nettie was killed because of my mistake. His attempts at freedom slowed as his face grew pale. Even his feathers looked limp and started to lose color as the life was being choked out of him. Being as desperate as I was, I looked around trying to find anything to help with. The only thing in the small space was a dusty and forgotten drink cart. Holding my breath, I darted from behind Bodhi to grab a can of soda and threw it down the open door and into the first-class aisleway. As the monster turned its head towards the noise, I snuck up behind it and took hold of a feather. It walked forwards, trying to see where the can of soda landed, not even noticing me pulling a feather out as it walked. The moment it was in first class, Bodhi scooped up the limp Nettie and we all pressed into the wall as much as possible. The pilot came shuffling back in a slow gait, one clawed hand dragging behind the passenger as it went back inside the cockpit with the corpse for God knows what. I let out my breath, feeling dizzy from fear. Bodhi quickly dragged us along and I couldn't fight her. She shoved us all inside a small bathroom, locking the door behind us. Nettie was slumped against the wall, his head limp against his chest. I forgot about everything but him for a few moments. There wasn't enough space to lay him down. I looked up at Bodhi, panic overtaking any kind of reasoning. "We need to get him outside to do CPR or something," I said, hands shaking. I was checking him over, dreading how pale he was. A dark bruise covered his entire neck from the attack. Bodhi didn't look as worried as I was, and I thought she was heartless. "Give him a few minutes, he'll wake up. As long as we're in the sky, we can't die," she said with a shrug. I simply could not believe her. Every second we spent not trying to do CPR felt like a wasted second. When I looked back, I could have sworn his face had gained some color. My chest hurt and I almost couldn't take any more surprises, even good ones. I watched as Nettie slowly started to recover. His feathers were regaining color, and his bruise was fading. Finally, he gasped as his eyes flew open. Coughing, he looked around trying to understand where he was. My hands flew to his cheeks to give him a look over to see if he was really all right. "Sorry, we can ask again," Nettie said, his voice hoarse. After what just happened, he was ready to go through all of that again for my sake. I shook my head. Even if I didn't steal a feather, I refused to let him die for my sake. I showed him the large black feather I'd plucked from the pilot while it was distracted. Nettie's face lit up. He was still recovering, but overly excited about the trophy. "You're terrific," he said in a voice still a little hoarse. I felt my face flush a little. No one had ever complimented me like that before, at least never in such an excited tone. Bodhi rolled her eyes at us, saying she was going to do rounds to make sure the pilot didn't know something was up. When she left, I was crammed on the bathroom floor with Nettie. His long legs needed to be pressed to his chest for both of us to fit. "I'm sorry you were hurt," I said after the silence became too much. "Don't worry about it. You're the passenger. It's my job to help out. I don't mind." Nettie was far too nice. He should mind. Thinking he was being killed right in front of me was too scary to even think about. I was glad I got the feather because I never wanted to see something like that again. "What's the plan after you're feeling better?" I asked him, while still listening in case the monster came back for his feather. "There's a room we can use at the back of the plane to jump over to the one Saudi's in. He should know what to do. He's been a flight attendant for the longest, I think," Nettie said, sounding much better than even a few seconds ago. At least we had some sort of idea of what to do next. I gave him a few more minutes until I felt comfortable enough to let him move. I needed to face the crowd of silent dead passengers again. My skin crawled to the sight of them all. Bodhi met us and followed along until we reached the back of the plane. It was noisier back there. Nettie stopped to face her, and a worried expression came over her normally displeased face. "I'm leaving you in charge for a while," he said to her in a chipper tone. "I've never handled the entire plane on my own before," she admitted. Nettie assured her that she would do fine until he got back. He even gave her another gold star, and oddly enough, that made her feel better. She gave us a weak wave as Nettie guided me inside the small room to leave the plane. The room wasn't large. It could only fit a handful of people inside if needed. A red bulb overhead made it appear somewhat creepy. All the noise of the plane was shut out the moment the door closed. It was so silent I could hear my own body functioning. Nettie walked over to the only other thing inside the room, a blank book set into the wall. Using the feather I gave him, he dug the tip into his palm. With his own blood, he wrote the name of the plane he wanted us to go to. An odd sensation came from under my feet, as if I was standing on a waterbed for a few seconds. When it settled, my guide smiled and made his way towards the door. When he opened it, I saw this was not at all the same plane we started in. I didn't even understand how this place could be called a plane. A grand ballroom was below us beyond a balcony. My mouth dropped open a little from all the lush details and glittering chandelier. Saudi isn't really in charge of a plane. It's more of a blimp, Nettie explained as he headed towards the stairs. I caught up, still trying to take in all the sights. There weren't any of the dead passengers like before. The only person there was a man walking towards the bottom of the stairway to greet us, his long, thin legs swiftly carrying him through the distance. Nettie skipped a few steps to jump into the older man's arms, clearly overjoyed to see him again. He let out happy chirps as his feathers were ruffled. Somehow, the sight gave me a weird feeling. Was I jealous he could pet Nettie's feathers and I couldn't? No, that wasn't it.
Nettie, what in sky's name are you doing here? It's been ages. Look at how tall you've gotten.
Nettie must have gotten some of his personality from Saudi. The man's feathers were shorter and a gray hue instead of silver, and crow's feet appeared at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. I stopped in front of the pair, praying he had an answer to how I could get home.
You brought a passenger? He looks pretty lively, Saudi commented.
Yeah, that's the problem, I answered. It took him a bit, but he got what I was trying to say. Saudi was as shocked as Nettie was, seeing I was alive. He checked my pulse a few times just to be certain. He apologized for getting into my personal space, but couldn't help himself.
I haven't seen someone alive in so long. Not since that guy and gal dropped by all those years ago,
he said, after he accepted that I was breathing. My heart quickened. So he had seen someone alive before. Coming here was a good call. How did they get back on land? I asked, quickly excited.
They didn't. They stayed.
All my hopes were crushed at that moment. Nessie pressed on for me. But is there a way to get him back? It's what he wants, and it's our job to make our passengers happy, Nettie chirped, determined in his mission. Saudi paused to think. His long hand scratched at his chin. He asked to see the pilot's feather we arrived with. Looking it over, he didn't appear to like the look of it. Finally, he let us in on his train of thought.
There are two choices: stay or jump. Most of these planes don't have a parachute, nor are they at a suitable height for a jump with one. There is one plane you can go to, but I worry for your safety, Saudi started to explain.
I'll be fine, Nettie chipped in, but his mentor shook his head.
This feather you have only has enough for 2 trips. You can only go so far in order to arrive to the plane you need. You must go to a different plane that is closer, then jump to the one you want. You're able to reach it if you enter a dark plane, then the one with parachutes. There are no safer planes close enough for the jumps, and I doubt you'll get another feather. My pilot is grumpier than yours. I suppose you could go back to your plane and try to get more from your pilot.
I was trying to make sense of what he was saying. We would need to jump or travel between planes. I didn't want to find out what a dark plane was. Even Nettie looked stressed. Then again, we couldn't try the pilot again either. I got lucky the first time. If I could help it, I didn't want Nettie to get hurt again. But what was more dangerous? A dark plane or the pilot? I didn't know dark planes were real, Nettie said. What's a dark plane? I asked, trying to figure out the danger level. Saudi looked me over as if trying to decide if I was worthy of such a serious secret. My heart couldn't take much more of this. His silver eyes were studying me, and Nettie started to sweat a little from the silent interaction. The older man finally nodded and I relaxed a little. The passengers on these planes are dead. You can see that. They fly until they're ready to move on. I can't tell you what afterlife, if any, they're headed towards. The flight attendants make the trip more pleasant and guide their way if needed. My plane, or rather blimp, is nearly empty because most have moved on right now. But a dark plane is a result of passengers that simply sit and rot until there's nothing left. Sadly, there always needs to be a flight attendant on the plane. They rot as well. At least they recover after the last passengers rotted to nothing. Now, that didn't sound good at all. Our options were bleak. I almost considered going back to face the pilot. I didn't want to be on a plane worse than the one I started out on. I looked over to my flight attendant so we could talk about what we wanted to do. On top of all of this, I didn't like the idea that my only way out of this was to jump from a plane. I had a fear of heights. People died of skydiving, right? How safe was our safest option? Could we get another feather without the pilot attacking you? I asked. Maybe. We would need to wait until the end of the flight for him to be less grumpy. Sometimes that takes 100 years, but I've seen a plane empty out sooner than that before. My head was swimming. I couldn't last 100 years here. With these options, I understood why others stayed. They simply might not have had a choice. But the math wasn't adding up. How long had planes even been around for? Nettie was acting as if he'd done a few 100-year flights already. Saudi noticed my confusion and spoke up. Time works differently around here. It may be 100 years, but on the ground only a second or two have passed. We also get passengers from all sorts of time eras. My eyes landed on Nettie, who was smiling and nodding along. Just how old was he? Hundreds? Thousands? And how old did that make Saudi? That's a good point. The pilots tend to listen better after a flight, but your passenger isn't dead and will be by the time the flight ends. I'm afraid you either need to risk the pilot or a dark plane, or stay like everyone else, Saudi said with a shrug. Damn it. This wasn't working out like I'd hoped. I bet the pilot would be even more pissed off the second time around. One of us was going to die, and I couldn't come back like Nettie. The idea seemed to be the dark plane. After all, I'd been around the dead before and they hadn't harmed me. Hell, they didn't even look as if they could move. We settled on going to the dark plane. If it became dangerous, we could jump back to Saudi's blimp and try getting a feather from his pilot. With it all set in stone, Saudi guided us through the massive blimp to another room to leave from. I asked why we couldn't use the room we arrived in, and Nettie explained that there were two for safety reasons, one to arrive in and one to leave from. Apparently, someone arrived while someone else was trying to leave at the same time, and that caused a big enough mess for them to change the system. That meant we would have to go through the entire dark plane to get to the room to leave. Nettie was given one last pat on the head before we set off. Somehow, I felt as if Saudi was convinced we weren't going to make it. He was proud of Nettie for doing his job, and at the same time regretted it. I considered just staying. It wasn't as if I had much going on in my life that I needed to risk someone else's for. Then again, Nettie wouldn't die. He could just be hurt. I was the one who could die up here. If I died, I might end up back on the plane, so both outcomes were the same. Might as well try to get some of my life back. The door closed behind us and my stress level spiked. Nettie wasn't showing how scared he was, aside from his slightly shaken hand as he wrote out our destination. The feeling of the floor becoming a liquid under my feet came and left. I couldn't bring myself to open the door. Nettie took my hand, then the door handle in the other, so we could face whatever was on the other side together. This guy better get a huge raise for all of this. The door opened and the smell hit me first. I nearly doubled over from it. Eyes watering, we took a few steps forwards. My shoes sank almost to the laces in something thick and black. Each step was a chore and Nettie was having issues with his thin legs. Around us, the plane was covered in black mold spots. Every surface was grimy. This place was already nearly rotting away. Thinking we should turn back, I tugged on my hand only for Nettie to look over his shoulder to give me a weak smile. He was strong enough to press on, and it gave me the strength to do the same. With our fingers tightly interlocked, we went through the doorway to start down the long aisle going across the plane. The passengers were far beyond anything I could ever think of in my worst nightmares. Groaning and clicking came from their seats as we slowly walked by. I tried holding my breath, trying not to be seen by these creatures. Some seats were occupied by nearly rotten away skeletons, while others were taken up by bodies turned to a sludgy mess of black grime. Red eyes peered out, almost glowing. Some raised their hands at us. The movement made the ooze from their bodies slide away from their blackened bones. My stomach turned. I couldn't handle walking through an entire plane of this. Just as we were clearing the first part of the plane and almost reached the small area that separated first class from the rest, a spongy hand landed on my arm. I jumped and muffled a scream. Looking down, I met the red eyes staring back up at me. My mind went blank. In that moment, I'd seen what death truly was. My entire sense of self was drowning in misery and dark grief. I felt as if I would never recover from it. Unaware of myself, I opened my mouth to scream. Nettie swooped into action, muffling the sound and dragging my struggling body into the small attendance area. I got away from him, slamming into the wall and trying to hide behind the drink cart. He was whispering and trying to shush me as my breathing became so hard I saw stars. I couldn't do this. I couldn't be here. I wanted to go home, to my crappy car and my dead-end job. If I couldn't go there, I would rather die than stay on a plane like this. Just before I sank too deep into that awful feeling and lost myself completely, Nettie pulled me out of it. A warm feeling started in my chest as the frantic panic began to fade. My breathing returned to normal and my sight came back. The flight attendant ran a hand through my hair, whispering encouraging words. If I wasn't with him, I wouldn't have been able to make it this far. When I calmed down a little, he gave me a nervous smile, glad to see I was doing slightly better. Movement behind him made my eyes go wide as I choked out a warning. Turning his head, he looked over at the dark figure that shambled into the room behind him. It was black like the rest of the plane. Red glowing eyes stared at us through dripping feathers. The long, thin legs gave it the appearance of a flight attendant. Nettie shot up to face the creature as I stayed on the ground, body shaking from fear. Instead of trying to get away from it, Nettie took a few steps closer. "Seti, is this where you ended up?" he said in a small, distraught voice I almost couldn't hear. Hearing the noise, the creature lashed out. It clamped down a set of jaws filling with pointed teeth onto Nettie's shoulders. He still refused to move. As the thing clawed at him, he wrapped his arms around the rotting thing. He then did the same thing that he did with me. He talked to the creature in a gentle voice, trying to calm it down. From the sounds of things, they knew each other a long time ago. I never expected it to work. The attacks lessened until the dark arms hung at its side. Lifting a set of teeth from Nettie's bleeding shoulder, the red eyes looked blankly at him. It was impossible to tell what the creature was feeling. "Go." The voice was low and so hoarse it sounded like an inhale. Seti had regained their mind, but only for a short while. The flight attendant could snap again at any moment. Giving his friend one last hug, Nettie took my outstretched hand. I could see the tears in his eyes, and they weren't from the wounds he received. We pressed on to the next part of the plane, desperate to get out before something else happened. We walked quickly, with all those eyes looking directly at us. Nettie's hand trembled in mine. That crushing dark feeling was coming back. I could feel so many stares on my back. A cold sweat broke out all over my body, and my breathing once again grew uneven. A sound came, and I looked over to see what caused it. One of the passengers stood up. Body mostly staying together. A few rows away, it slipped into the aisle. That caused the others to get the same idea. Our pace quickened to as fast as we could walk through the sludge on the floor. Seti was following behind us, red glowing eyes unreadable. With only a few rows to freedom, a hand reached out to grab mine. I tried with all my might to pull away to find it stuck. Nettie's eyes widened and a scream started in his throat. I was going to be pulled into the forming horde. I pulled again, trying to get free, when I was saved by someone I didn't expect. Seti reached out and snapped the arm holding my own. Using his free hand, he tore into his own face, long gashes freely bleeding. The sight and smell drove those creatures wild. It was my turn to save Nettie. He screamed, trying to get to his friend. I easily picked the light flight attendant off his feet and dragged him away with one arm around his waist. So many dark forms piled onto Seti, tearing and biting at the poor thing. For a few seconds, I could see his face looking over at us. I thought there was a hint of a smile through all that rot. He was completely covered by creatures pulling him apart. More came swarming towards us. I got inside the small room with Nettie, slamming the door shut just as bodies thudded on the other side, trying to get in. For a second, Nettie was going to open the door and try and save Seti. I swiftly locked it and pulled him into a tight hug, trying to calm him down like he did with me. In that dim room, I held his frail body as we listened to those creatures pound on the door. His eyes wet and his body shaking from stress. I couldn't help anyone, he choked out. I dared to run my hand through his feathers once before resting my palm on his cheek. Silver eyes wet, he looked up at me, appearing so different from the person I met earlier. I wanted to blame myself for everything, for forcing him to go through all of this. Taking a deep breath to ground myself, I shook my head. You helped me. We're almost there. We can do this. I know we can. Once I get home, you'll be able to come back and save Seti with more help, right? A thin smile appeared at my suggestion. Until he could get back to this plane with someone to help out, Seti was going to be torn apart again and again. He couldn't die after all. That fact was almost too much to stomach. We needed to get going so Nettie could focus on saving another person. He looked calmer, even with the noise of the passengers behind us. Moving his head down, he silently signaled that he wanted one more head pat before we carried off. I ruffled his feathers for good luck. Going over to the book set inside the wall, he wrote the location of the next and hopefully last plane. The sounds faded as we jumped to the plane that should have had a way to get me back to the land of the living. My hand gripped tightly in his. I saw the pilot's feather fade into dust. How are you going to get back? I asked, shocked I hadn't thought of this before. I'll get a feather from the pilot here. After you get home, there won't be a rush for one, he answered back, his voice not as cheery as it once was. My stomach knotted up. That could take forever, and we didn't know what we would face on this plane. Would it be the same as the dark one we were in before? I couldn't bring myself to mention any of this. I just let him lead me out of the room and into a very noisily dimly lit plane. I couldn't hear myself think over the roar of the engines. We were on a military plane, a small one with 6 men strapped to their seats dressed in full gear. They had their heads down and eyes closed. I saw a closed steel door and my insides were doing flip-flops, thinking I would soon need to jump out of that. Before Nettie did anything, he took out his small notebook from before. He wrote down something quickly on a piece of paper, folded it in half, and sealed it with a gold star sticker. I went to take the note, but he shoved it in my pants pocket, showing me it was meant for later. Then he went over to the end of the seats looking for what we needed. I didn't think it would be so easy, but he grabbed something I thought was a backpack at first. As if he had practiced this, Nettie helped me get the parachute on. He didn't want to risk speaking and waking up the men, so he made notes on how to use the parachute and when to pull it open. I was scared to death. At least if I died from the jump, I might see Nettie again. I was not at all ready to leave, but our hands were forced. One of the men raised his head. Red eyes landed on us. I'd hoped they weren't the same as on the dark plane, but was proven wrong. This plane didn't show signs of rot, but the men did. 2 others raised their heads and Nettie shoved me towards the door. His arm was caught, and the 2 who weren't strapped in reached for him. I looked around for a weapon and grabbed a rifle from a still sleeping soldier. I used it as a baseball bat in the small space. The gun was rusted and useless for anything else. We broke free, my mind unable to keep up with everything going on. A rush of air came as Nettie got the door open, just as hands wrapped around his neck from behind. He fought through the hands grabbing for him. He took a hold of the front of my shirt and with a strength I didn't know he had, he pushed me towards the door. I screamed when the only thing keeping me in the plane was Nettie's grip. I grabbed at his arm, begging him to let me back in. The soldiers were tearing at his feathers and exposed skin. Deep cuts appeared from their broken nails, and yet Nettie only smiled at me. I couldn't leave him behind. It would be the same situation as Seti. They would overpower him and kill him over and over again. My pleas went completely ignored. With one last bright smile, Nettie dropped me out of the plane. I don't remember the fall or pulling the cord. The earliest memory after dropping out of the plane while reaching out for my friend was waking up in a hospital in a completely different country. I'd been missing for a month before I was found in Scotland, of all places, hanging from a parachute tangled in a tree. It had malfunctioned and everyone thought it was a miracle I was alive. No one could figure out how I got into the country, or what I was doing being dropped out of a plane. I wasn't offering any answers, and considering the damage, people believed that I didn't remember what happened. Since my parents were well off, not really rich but doing all right, the police thought I was kidnapped for ransom. Why they took me across the sea and dumped me out of a plane was something they would never understand. I hadn't been on the best terms with my parents beforehand, but my mother traveled to help get me home. Flying on a plane so soon after everything happened felt far too strange. It was also a new experience considering I took the trip in a wheelchair. The fall that should have killed me disfigured my face and took my left leg under the knee. I could be dead, so I wasn't as upset as I thought I would be. Thankfully, they kept the possessions I had on me, including a small note sealed with a golden sticker that proved everything was real. In the handwriting was a time, date, and location set a year after I got out of the hospital. In that year, I got back on my feet, so to speak. The prosthetic leg I was given took some time to adjust to. Some days I still felt the phantom pain in my missing leg, and I also needed to go into speech classes. My lip had been torn open and scarred. Speaking without a lisp was almost harder than walking again. Or maybe it was all in my head. I also learned how to drive with my new false foot, but didn't do so very often. As the meeting started to get closer, I started to regret not getting plastic surgery for my face. As I drove for the airport, I kept touching my torn lip, wondering if the one I was going to meet would turn heel and leave after seeing how my face looked now. I anxiously waited inside the airport where the small note said. I've read those words hundreds of times over the year, and yet still I triple-checked to ensure I was in the right spot. Looking up from the worn piece of paper, I spotted someone I thought I would never see again. His face lit up when our eyes met across the room. He took off in a run towards me, ducking between people and a duffel bag slamming against his back. "I knew you were alive!" Nettie yelled excitedly. He looked more human this time. He wasn't covered in feathers, and I was so glad to see him. I've been waiting a whole year to see Nettie again, and to thank him for what he did for me. I knew I was falling before I knew I was dead. There was no wind, no rush of air, no sense of speed, and no distant ground racing up to meet me. There was only darkness and the undeniable knowledge that I was dropping through it. My stomach tightened, my arms jerked outward, grabbing at nothing. I tried to scream, but there was no air in my lungs, or maybe there was no throat for the scream to climb through yet. For a few impossible seconds, I existed as panic without a body. Then memory returned to me in pieces. The hospital, the pressure in my chest, my wife crying beside the bed, a nurse saying something, the ceiling tiles above me losing focus, and my own heartbeat becoming a sound from another room. And then it stopped, and then I died. And the moment I understood all of that, the falling stopped. My body dropped the last few feet and landed hard in a leather armchair. Pain shot up through my spine. Air burst from my mouth. I grabbed the arms of the chair and lurched forward, gasping, blinking, trying to make sense of the room that had appeared around me. It wasn't heaven. That was my first clear thought. The second was worse. It might be hell. The room was dark, damp, and old. The stone walls rose around me, slick with moisture, water sliding down them in slow threads. The lights overhead buzzed weakly, giving everything a tired yellow cast. The air smelled faintly of mildew and sulfur with something stale underneath it. I sat there breathing it in, still gripping the chair, afraid to move and more afraid not to. Directly in front of me was a desk buried beneath paperwork. Folders leaned in stacks, loose pages spilled over the edges, filing trays overflowing, coffee mugs sat everywhere, each one stained black inside. An ancient computer monitor glowed at the center of the mess. Behind the desk sat a demon. There was no gentler word for it. He was enormous, crocodilian, broad through the shoulders with dark green scales, a long snout, and yellow eyes magnified behind thick bifocals. He wore suspenders over a wrinkled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His claws moved across the keyboard with annoying precision. Above his head, mounted crookily on the stone wall, a red neon sign flickered. Welcome to hell. The demon did not look up. He clicked his mouse 3 times, sighed through his nostrils, typed something, clicked again, then muttered, "No, Majorie, you may not appeal on grounds of spiritual inconvenience. You poisoned 2 husbands and a bridge partner. Enjoy the corrective swamp." He clicked once more, shuffled a paper into a folder, and finally lifted his eyes to me. "Dennis. Wonderful. Another expression of total surprise." I stared at him with my surprised face. "Where am I? Am I dead?" "Yes." "Is this hell?" "Technically, no." "Technically?" The demon leaned back in his chair, which groaned beneath him. "This is hell's waiting room. The distinction doesn't matter much, but I'm contractually obligated to be accurate." I looked at the sign again. "It says, 'Welcome to hell.'" Marketing insisted." "This has got to be a mistake," I said. I had the immediate impression he had heard those exact words more often than anyone in existence. "Of course it is. Every soul says that. Nobody arrives and says, 'Ah, yes, fair enough.' They all come in with paperwork they never filled out and confidence they didn't earn." No, you don't understand. I was a Christian." "Were you?" "Yeah, I believed in God." "How marvelous for you." "I thought I was going to heaven." At that, he rolled both eyes so dramatically I thought they might disappear into the back of his skull. Then, with no warning, a long reptilian tongue slid out of his mouth and swept across both eyes. I recoiled in horror. "God!" "Wrong one." "What was that?" "I don't have any tear ducts. The scales and bifocals are a wretched combination. Would you prefer I blinked politely and suffered in silence?
I'd prefer not to be here.
And I'd prefer a staff of competent assistants and a chair that doesn't smell faintly of monk. Life disappoints. Death continues that tradition.
I tried to steady my breathing. I'm telling you, man, I believed in God, I prayed, I went to church.
The demon folded his claws on the desk. Would that God happen to be Anu? I stared at him.
Who?
He shut his eyes again, this time with deeper exhaustion. Anu, Father of the gods, Lord of the heavens, source of all divine authority, true ruler of the cosmos. Very old, very important, not currently enjoying strong brand recognition.
I've never heard of him.
That has been a persistent problem. Tremendous authority, terrible outreach.
You're telling me the one true God is someone nobody even worships anymore?
Yep. Old Mesopotamian deity.
That's insane.
It's theology. The two frequently overlap. I sat back, feeling cold despite the damp heat of the room.
So, everyone got it wrong?
Not everyone. There are always a few. Anu has his loyalists. Small group, though.
This can't be how it works.
And yet, observe that it is working. I looked again at the miserable office. The stained mugs, the flickering lights, the endless paperwork. The red neon sign? This is hell? A dingy office with bad lighting? The demon laughed. It was a harsh grinding sound that filled the room and shook a few papers loose from the nearest stack. Ah, Dennis. Again, technically not hell. It's the waiting room or administration.
What are you then?
Sardonyx. Intake administrator. Third receiving office. Western soul distribution arm. Occasional unwilling therapist. Full-time witness to mankind's magnificent inability to choose the right God.
You decide where I go?
I process your assignment.
So, what happens now?
Now, we determine what sort of hell best suits your educational, spiritual deficiencies.
Deficiencies?
Yes. Hell is not a punishment. Not in the old shouting and pitchforks and fire and brimstone ways, although some do get that. Hell is correction, purification, instruction. You arrive with your soul carrying defects, and those defects must be addressed before paradise can receive you.
So, I'm being punished.
He tapped one claw on the desk. You are being taught. Punishment is not quite the same. Punishment requires that you suffer. Education requires that you change.
And when I learn?
You ascend.
To heaven?
Yes.
With God?
With Anu. Do try to keep up.
What if I don't learn?
Then you remain until you do.
How long?
That depends on how deeply attached you are to those spiritual defects.
He continued more quietly now, though the sarcasm never fully left.
Every soul reaches paradise eventually. Every one. No one is abandoned. No one is forgotten. Some arrive, recognize themselves quickly, and move on in a century. Others require thousands of years, millions, billions on occasion. Stubbornness is the one human invention that truly impresses the divine. The thought of that much time struck me harder than the word hell had. Billions? Rare, but not unheard of. You should meet the tyrants. Actually, no, you shouldn't. Most of them are your world history leaders, and the other ones are usually on the HOA committee. I sat there dumbly, not knowing how to respond. What did I do to deserve this? I asked. Tell me, did you feel connected to people when you were alive? The question unsettled me. What does that mean? It's a simple question, Dennis. I already simplified it from the original divine phrasing, which involved 17 clauses and a reference to clay vessels. I had people. That's not what I asked. I looked away from him. The truth was that I spent most of my life surrounded and somehow separate. I had a family, friends more or less, co-workers who invited me to things, a church where people knew my name and shook my hand every Sunday. I wasn't lonely in the obvious way. I had never lived in complete isolation, never gone months without conversation, never been the kind of man people worried about because nobody had seen him lately. But connection had always seemed to happen around me rather than inside me. I don't know. Sardonyx waited. I always felt like other people had instructions I didn't get. Like everyone understood something basic about being human and I was pretending. Family gatherings, church dinners, parties, work meetings. I could do them. I knew what to say, but it felt like acting. Were you unhappy? Not exactly. Lonely? Not exactly. The saddest category. Not enough pain to demand repair, not enough joy to call it living. I looked up at him sharply. He was clicking away. What are you doing? Listening. No, you're typing. I contain multitudes. His attention sharpened on the monitor. One claw rested on the mouse, the other on the keyboard. He clicked back and forth through several screens. The slow smile that spread across his snout made my stomach tighten. What? I said. He kept reading. Sardonyx? Oh, Dennis, he said at last. My friend. I don't like that. What did you find? I think I have the place just for you. I gripped the arms of my chair again. What place? A very effective arrangement, used in many forms across the millennia for souls carrying your particular wound. Those who felt outside, separate, unclaimed by the human family. People who spent their lives convinced belonging was something that they didn't need to actually do. I said nothing. The words were too close. It isn't pleasant, but it has produced wonderful results. Eventually. Please don't let it be fire and brimstone. Please don't let it be fire and brimstone. I can't. I don't want to burn. Sardonyx waved a claw. Oh, nothing so pedestrian. Fire has its uses, but your problem is not flammability. I let out a breath and sank back into the chair. Relief hit me so quickly it almost made me dizzy. Oh, thank God. Sardonyx stared. Oh, right. Thank Anu. Progress already, my friend. So, where am I going? He looked back at the screen and chuckled. An apartment complex. Apartment complex? Yes. That's it? Sardonyx looked over the top of his bifocals. That is a dangerous phrase in my line of work, my friend. I'm serious. So am I. Never underestimate the universe's ability to make the ordinary educational. You're sending me to an apartment. A very nice one, from what I've been told. Central air, responsive maintenance, community events. Quite civilized. You're messing with me. Dennis, I have processed approximately 912 million souls. I stopped messing with people a very long time ago. Will I be alone? You'll have neighbors. I will? Thousands of them. Thousands? Potentially millions, depending on how adventurous you become. I felt my stomach tighten. Wait, what do you mean by... Sardonyx clicked his mouse. I arrived in the apartment building in another burst of gray smoke and almost fell over. For a second, I stood there coughing, waving my hands in front of my face, expecting heat, screams, chains, anything that might justify the word hell. Instead, I found myself in a lobby so large that my mind refused to accept it as a room. The ceiling rose hundreds of feet above me, layered with balconies and walkways and hanging lights that disappeared into a bright haze near the top. Marble floors stretched outward in every direction, polished to a shine by the movement of countless feet. Massive pillars held up the levels above, each one wider than a house. Far off, fountains poured water into circular basins, and beyond them were reception desks, seating areas, elevators, staircases, kiosks, signs, and streams of people moving through it all with the ordinary impatience of commuters. That was the strange part. The people. After Sardonyx's office, after that damp little room and the dead quiet between sentences, the noise hit me hard. Voices overlapped in dozens of languages. Shoes struck marble. People laughed. Someone cursed. Someone sang. A group of men in robes argued loudly near a directory. A woman in a business suit hurried past me while speaking into a phone. Two guys chased each other around a pillar until an old man shouted at them to stop running. For the first time since dying, I was surrounded by souls, and the sheer normality of them made me feel less comforted than invaded. I turned in place, trying to understand the size of the building, but there was no clear edge to it. The lobby extended too far. Every direction contained more motion, more entrances, more elevators, more lines of people, and more doors leading elsewhere. Hell apparently had crowd control. A large reception desk stood near the center of the lobby, or what I assumed was the center. Behind it sat a man in a dark suit with silvered hair, combed neatly back and hands folded on the counter. He looked almost human, except for the stillness. His face was pleasant without being warm and patient without being kind. When I approached, he looked up before I spoke. "Dennis Harlow," he said. "How do you know my name?" "You have an appointment." "I didn't make one." "No one does." "Where am I?" "You are in hell. More specifically, Residential Complex 9. You have been assigned a permanent residence pending spiritual correction and eventual ascension." "Permanent residence?" "Until you learn what you are here to learn." "How long does that take?" "That varies." "Give me an estimate." "Some stay thousands of years, some stay several million. There are some extreme outliers on the longer side. The building does not release statistics because residents respond poorly to averages. Several million? It is best not to compare yourself to others. That's easy for you to say. It is, yes. He looked down at a file that had not been on the desk a moment before, turned one page, and slid a key across the counter. You will be on floor 8703. I waited for him to correct himself. He didn't. I'm sorry, what floor? 8703. There are 8,000 floors? There are considerably more than 8,000 floors. My mouth opened, then closed. How many more? That information is not available to you at this time. I looked toward the elevators and back at him. 8,703 is high. Many residents would consider that near the ground. This is insane, I said. What exactly am I supposed to learn here? That is for you to discover. If souls could be told their flaws and corrected them immediately, hell would be unnecessary. Before I could ask another question, a small reptilian bellhop appeared beside me with a brass luggage cart, though I had no luggage. He wore a red uniform with gold trim and a little cap balanced between two ridges on his head. A key ring hung from one clawed finger. Mr. Harrow, I'll show you to your apartment. Try to get along with your neighbors. You'll be seeing them for a very long time. I didn't like the way he said that. I followed the bellhop toward a bank of elevators set into the far wall of the lobby. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, some opening and closing constantly, some rising behind glass fronts already packed with new arrivals and attendants. Mine had a clear front and polished brass doors. The bellhop stepped inside, tapped a panel, and entered my floor number with quick practice movements. The doors closed. The elevator began to rise. At first, I expected a normal ascent. The brief pressure in the legs, the passing floors, and the ding. But this elevator moved with maddening patience. The lobby dropped away beneath us, slowly revealing a vast interior I had not understood from the ground. Above the main floor were open levels arranged around enormous courtyards, and each level was not a hallway or landing but a world. I pressed my hands to the glass. We rose past a broad common area lined with market stalls and low buildings. People in linen robes moved among them. Beyond that was a temple courtyard where figures knelt before statues I did not recognize. Higher still was a place of stone streets and painted columns, where men in tunics argued and clusters and women carried baskets through a square. Then came another level with tiled roofs, another with smoke drifting from workshops, another with narrow streets and lanterns, another with lawns and iron fences and horse-drawn carriages moving along impossible indoor roads. What am I looking at? I asked. The building, the bellhop said. I can see that. No, I mean all of this. These people, these places. The complex houses souls from every civilization that has ever existed. Similar cultures and eras are often grouped within compatible floors, though there are exceptions. Each level contains a common area designed to reflect the practices, habits, and expectations of those assigned there. They just keep living? Many do. They work, build friendships, argue, worship, marry, open restaurants, start clubs, complain about noise. People continue being people. We passed what looked like a medieval village centered around a church in a muddy square, though there was no mud on the elevator glass. Above it came a space filled with tents and fire pits where men and women dressed in animal hides and sat around cooking fires. Above that, a floor where men in armor trained in formation while children watched from a rail. Higher still, something more modern, all brick buildings and factory roofs and crowds moving beneath electric signs. I saw Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, farmers, soldiers, priests, merchants, men with powdered wigs, women in long dresses, people in suits, people in furs, people with painted faces, and people from cultures I could not place and had no name for. Every floor held a civilization in motion. Every courtyard contained daily life continuing beyond death, not frozen but extended. Men, women, children, teenagers, people of all ages. It should have been beautiful. In some way it was. But there was terror in the scale of it, in the thought that all of humanity had been gathered, sorted, stacked, and set loose inside a building with no visible end. How tall is this place? The bellhop didn't answer immediately. I don't know. You work here? Yeah. And you don't know? I've been as high as floor 70,000. My stomach tightened. I have never seen the top. No one I know has seen it either. Not in person. The elevator kept climbing. Floor after floor slipped past the glass. Towns, cities, villages, gardens, districts, temples, factories, theaters, farms, all arranged inside the impossible body of the building. At last, after what felt like hours, the elevator slowed. Floor 8,703, the bellhop said. I let out a breath. One more thing. Elevators offer new arrivals only. From this point on, residents use stairs, unless otherwise authorized. Stairs? Yeah. To go down? To go anywhere between floors. As long as those floors are within the civilization you've been assigned to. The rear doors opened into a long hallway with patterned carpet, warm lighting, and apartment doors stretching in both directions. Compared to the worlds below, it was almost disappointingly normal. Still, there were sounds behind the doors. Music, footsteps, a burst of laughter, someone speaking angrily, a television, dishes clattering, lives taking place inches away from me. Real neighbors. The bellhop checked the key tag and led me down the corridor. We walked long enough for the hallway to begin feeling larger than it first appeared. Eventually, he stopped at a door marked 8,703 19C and handed me my key. This is yours. I took it, still staring at the number. I still have questions. Everyone does. What am I supposed to do first? Settle in. What about floors? What about the people? What about getting out? The bellhop lifted one claw. Questions permitted to be answered may be answered by your television. My television? Yeah. I don't understand. He gave a polite little bow, turned and walked back down the hall before I could stop him. I stood there alone, key in hand, surrounded by muffled signs of other people's existence. Then I unlocked the door. The apartment was ordinary. That was tough for me to deal with. A living room with a couch and coffee table, a small kitchen, a bedroom visible through an open doorway, a bathroom, lamps, curtains, a television mounted on the wall. It looked clean, comfortable, and completely sane. Nothing about it screamed. Nothing burned, nothing bled, no chains hung from the ceiling, no demons waited in the corners. I walked to the couch and sat down heavily. For the first time since arriving in the building, silence returned. I looked around the apartment, at the kitchen I hadn't chosen, the bedroom where I was apparently expected to sleep, the television that might or might not answer questions about my damnation, and I understood with a slow, sinking certainty that however long I stayed here, this was no temporary room. This was home. I sat on that couch for a long time after the bellhop left, waiting for the apartment to reveal whatever made it hell. Nothing happened. The refrigerator hummed. The lamp beside the couch gave off a soft amber light. Somewhere beyond the walls, a door opened and closed. A woman laughed in another apartment, distant enough that I could not understand the words. It was all so ordinary that it became difficult to sit with. Ordinary things that are only comforting when they belong to an ordinary life. Put them in hell and they become something different. A couch, a kitchen, a made bed, clean towels. Wouldn't expect that in hell. Eventually, I stood up and checked the refrigerator. It was full, with my favorite stuff. The pantry was stocked, the bathroom had soap, toothpaste, shampoo, razors, everything a man might need. I opened cabinets and drawers, touched plates, silverware, folded shirts, a stack of blank notebooks. Nothing burned my hand, nothing whispered at me from the shadows. No demon crawled out of the closet. I almost would have preferred that. At least then I would have known what my life here was supposed to be like. After a while, the silence became worse than the hallway noise, so I left. The corridor outside looked unchanged. Apartment doors stretched in both directions under warm lights, each one marked by a number and a small brass nameplate. Some had welcome mats, some had wreaths. One had a little wooden sign that said, "Bless this home," which seemed bold given the circumstances. I followed the hallway until I found a bank of signs mounted near an intersection. A leasing office, maintenance, laundry, refuse, common area. I chose the common area. The hall bent and widened. More people appeared as I walked, first in pairs, then in clusters, then in steady streams. Some nodded at me. I found myself doing what I have always done in crowded places, watching everyone for clues. How fast were they walking? Did people make eye contact here? Was smiling appropriate? Was I supposed to greet strangers? Even dead, even damned, I was still trying to pass as a person who was trying to integrate but really was trying to stay on the outside. The common area, it turns out, isn't a room. It opened before me as a vast public space beneath an artificial sky, wide enough that I stopped in place and forgot briefly to be afraid. Paths curved between lawns and fountains. Restaurants faced open plazas. Shops lined walkways beneath awnings. There were small cafes, newsstands, flower carts, bakeries, barbershops, offices, a theater marquee in the distance, and at the center of it all, a park larger than any park I had expected to find 8,000 floors above Hell's lobby. People were everywhere. Children chased one another through the grass while adults crawled after them. Couples sat close together on benches. Old men played chess beneath trees. A woman in a tracksuit jogged past me with earbuds in. 2 teenagers argued over something on a phone. A man in shirt sleeves carried a tray of hot dogs from a stand where steam rose in white curls. Office workers crossed the park with briefcases and paper cups of coffee. Nurses, doctors even. Someone had spread a blanket under a tree and was reading a book with one shoe off. No one looked tortured. I found an empty bench near a fountain and sat down. For a while I only watched. That had always been my safest position in life. The world seemed to go on by, not caring at all that I had just joined. "You're new," a woman said. I turned. She stood a few feet from the bench, holding a paper cup of coffee in one hand. She looked about my age, which I later learned was common in the building. Nobody looked old here. Nobody looked aged. Most people held somewhere between 25 and 30, restored to an idealized body that had nothing to do with how long they had existed. She had dark hair tied back loosely, sharp eyes, and an expression that suggested she had already decided I was harmless enough to approach. "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "Very." I was hoping I looked mysterious.
You look like you're trying to figure out whether the hot dog cart is some sort of punishment."
That thought crossed my mind. She smiled and sat beside me without asking, though not so close that it felt intrusive.
"Rachel."
"Dennis."
"I know."
I looked at her.
"Relax. I don't know because I'm important. I know because new arrivals wear a name tag for the first week."
I looked down. A small white sticker on my shirt read, "Dennis Harrow," in neat black letters. "Oh, come on," I said. Rachel laughed.
"The building has a sense of humor. Not a good one, but some."
I peeled at the sticker. It wouldn't come off.
"Don't bother. It disappears on its own."
She took a sip of coffee and followed my eyes across the park.
"How long have you been here?"
"An hour? Maybe 2. How long have you been here?"
"A few years."
"So, you're kind of new too."
"New enough to remember the panic. Old enough to know where the decent coffee is."
I looked back out at the park. "Do you understand this place?"
"No."
The answer came so quickly that I laughed. Rachel shrugged.
"I understand parts of it. Enough to function."
"How long are people here?"
"Nobody knows for sure."
"The manager said some people stay millions of years."
He wasn't lying.
"Do you know anyone that long?"
"I know people who have been in the building for hundreds of thousands of years."
I stared at her. Rachel looked back at me steadily, letting the words do their work. "That's impossible."
"We're dead, Dennis."
"I know that."
"Then readjust your standards for impossible."
Hundreds of thousands of years. Man, that phrase entered me and just kept going, finding deeper places to disturb in my psyche. A human life had once seemed long from the inside. 70 or 80 years could contain childhood, work, marriage, disappointments, illnesses, holidays, everything. But hundreds of thousands of years inside an apartment building, riding the same social machinery, meeting neighbors, finding routines, watching communities form and dissolve without anyone aging or dying, was a scale of existence that made identity feel fragile. How long could a man remain himself in a place like this? How long before habits became history and history became your own new prison? What are we supposed to do?
Ascend.
Ascend where?
Up.
That's helpful.
Floor by floor. That's the idea. You learn what you're here to learn. A door appears, you go through it, and you move to the next level. Eventually, if you reach the top, Anu receives you into heaven.
You sound pretty casual about that.
I've had a few years to get used to saying ridiculous things with a straight face.
How do you know all of this?
Your television.
My bellhop said that too.
Then your bellhop was more useful than mine. Mine told me not to flush paper towels and left.
The television talks?
It answers questions. Some questions. Think of it like your own Alexa, your own AI. It's not friendly exactly, more like an instruction manual that helps you figure this place out.
I thought of the black screen mounted in my living room. And it tells you how to leave?
It tells you what you need to know.
Which is? Rachel leaned back on the bench.
You don't escape by hating the floor. You don't escape by pretending to like it either. You have to become part of it.
Part of it how?
People like us are here because something in us never connected right. That's what my demon, Maldatrix, told me at least. That I never quite fit in. We kept ourselves apart. Maybe because we were afraid. Maybe because we felt superior. Maybe because we thought we were defective and didn't want anyone to notice. That's how it works. If you're on this level, it's because you never felt like you belonged.
I didn't answer. She looked at me gently, which was almost worse than if she had mocked me.
I'm guessing your demon asked you about belonging?
He asked if I felt connected to people. And you said? I said I had people. That sounds like something a new arrival would say. I had a family, friends, church. Were you with them? Or just near them? I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell her she didn't know me, that I had done what people were supposed to do, gone where I was supposed to go, shaken hands and remembered birthdays and did all the right things. But the defense collapsed before I built it. Near them. That was exactly it. I had spent my life near people, often surrounded by them, rarely to join them in any way that felt natural. I don't know how to do that. Most of us don't. That's why we're here. I looked across the park again. So what? I make friends and ascend? If only. The building knows the difference between participation and performance. I mean, we are talking about the afterlife here. Anu, all-powerful. We talked for hours. I told her about sardonyx, though she already knew the basic routine. She told me about her first week, how she refused to leave her apartment for 3 days, how she asked the television whether she was allowed to starve and received only the answer, nutrition is provided. We compared deaths with the awkwardness of people comparing surgeries. She died in a car accident, I died in a hospital bed. Neither of us knew what to do with the fact that death had been so final and then so inconveniently not final at all. At some point I realized I wasn't performing. That I was actually having a real conversation with somebody here. Eventually Rachel stood. I should go, she said. I felt disappointment before I could hide it. Right. She studied me for a moment. You can ask. Ask what? If you can see me again. I wasn't going to. You absolutely were. I looked away, embarrassed. Can I? Same time tomorrow, same bench. I nodded. Okay. She walked off through the park, disappearing into the movement of the common area. For a long time after she left, I sat there and watched people go about their lives. A hot dog vendor handed food to a man in a suit. A child cried because another child had taken his toy. A woman argued into her phone beside a fountain. The world here, filled with the dead as it was, continued. When I finally returned to my apartment, it felt a little bit less than a cell like it did before. It wasn't welcoming exactly, but interpretable. The television hung on the wall dark and patient. I stood in front of it for a while before picking up the remote. The screen came on without sound. White letters appeared against black. Ask a question. I swallowed. How do I get out of here? The answer appeared immediately. Ascend. I waited, then said, How? A longer pause this time. Advancement occurs one floor at a time. No shortcuts exist. Elevators are reserved for arrivals and authorized transfers. But how does one ascend? Belonging. I stared at the word. Explain. To ascend from a level, the resident must become part of the society in which they have been placed. The resident must accept the community, and the community must accept the resident. After that, you will ascend to the next floor, where you will have to become a part of the new community. I sat on the couch, still facing the screen. What does it mean to be accepted? Genuine integration is required. Superficial participation is insufficient. That's why you're here in the first place. Pretending will not work. The words held me there. I had pretended all my life. Not always dishonestly, not always on purpose, but consistently. I had learned the motions of belonging without trusting the thing itself. I had treated other people as rooms I could visit but never inhabit. Now, hell had me build an apartment in the middle of humanity and told me to learn what I had spent my whole life avoiding. How will I know if I succeed? A new door will appear in your apartment. Its edges will glow. Opening the door will initiate ascension to the next level, where placement will continue. The next level. Yes. How many levels? Answer unavailable. Of course. I leaned back and looked around the room. The apartment was quiet again, but it no longer felt empty in the same way. Beyond the walls were neighbors. Beyond the hallway was a common area filled with lives. Somewhere in the park was Rachel, who had seen something in my face and named it with care. Above me were floors I could not count. Somewhere at the top, if anything I had been told was true, waited heaven. I had thought arriving in hell meant I had reached the end of something. Sitting there with the television glowing in my face, I understood that my time in the afterlife had barely started to begin. 20 years passed before I understood how hell could become so ordinary. That number would have felt enormous to me when I was alive. 20 years was enough time to raise a child, ruin a marriage, build a career, lose your hair, bury your parents, forget the sound of an old friend's voice, and become the sort of person that your younger self would not recognize. In the apartment, 20 years was still 20 years, but it was a little different the way you felt it. I knew a man at church. Yeah, we had church here, even a Christian church. Old habits die hard, I guess. Who had been on floor 8,703 for 400 years. Rachel knew a woman from the North District who had been ascending through the building for nearly 11,000. There were rumors of residents who had spent hundreds of thousands of years moving upward one level at a time. I tried not to think about them. Most days, that was surprisingly easy. Life had a way of just continuing. Some days I woke beside Rachel and forgot I was even in hell. Then I would remember that there were 8,702 floors beneath me, an unknown number above, and a god I had never worshipped waiting somewhere beyond the final ceiling. The memory would settle over the room for a moment, quiet and complete. Then Rachel would ask if I wanted coffee, and we would go about our day. Floor 8,703 was larger than I first imagined, and then larger than I was able to imagine comfortably. At first, I thought of it as a neighborhood, then a town, then a city, and after years of traveling through it, I stopped using any of those words. By my estimate, our floor was roughly the size of a large state, maybe even a small country. It was arranged in the impossible architecture of the building. It had cities with skylines, suburbs with yard sales, marinas full of sailboats, universities, hospitals that treated injuries, even though no one could actually die, movie studios, churches, factories, shopping districts, airports, and professional football teams with supporters who took the whole thing far more seriously than damnation. There were actors and musicians, politicians and plumbers, street performers and accountants, talk show hosts and school teachers. There were government offices, gossip magazines. There were arguments over zoning laws. This place was huge. and larger than it had any right to be. One of the first useful things I learned from the television was how travel worked. If you were inside your apartment, spoke a destination aloud, a door would appear in the wall, and provided the destination was on your assigned floor and permitted to you, it would just take you there. At first, I found this astonishing. I would later stand in the room and say Central Park District, and a door would open where no door had been. Later, I would say work or St. Mark's or Rachel's apartment, and step through with the same bored expectation I once had for elevators. Convenience becomes ordinary pretty quickly. I realized that this was the way that the floor could be so monumentally big, and yet people could still have any job they wanted. I mean, hell was really just Earth. It was Earth in an apartment building, but we all did what we did there. You could choose a career, you could be an actor like I mentioned earlier, you could do just about anything you wanted. And your apartment room could take you anywhere you wanted. Rachel and I made use of the doors constantly in those years. We explored districts neither of us had seen. We spent afternoons walking along artificial coastlines where the horizon was a mural of impossible light. We went to concerts, restaurants, museums, street markets, comedy clubs, and once, at her insistence, a professional football game between the East Atrium Saints and the South Hall Engineers. I understood almost nothing about the local league, but Rachel yelled at the referees with such outrage that I felt a little bit more love for her before halftime. The rest came naturally, which was news for me. We were married 5 years after we met. I remember laughing during the ceremony because the absurdity of it overtook me all at once. Married in hell. Married under the authority of a priest who began the service by acknowledging Anu as true creator, then proceeded through a ceremony so Christian my grandmother would have approved. Rachel laughed too, and the priest told us both that joy was rarely inappropriate and we should use it while we had it. By our 20th year in the building, we had been married for 15. I found work in advertising, which felt ridiculous until I realized hell had products, services, campaigns, and an entirely endless supply of people who could be persuaded to attend festivals that they didn't really want to. The work suited me more than I expected. It required attention to what people wanted, feared, trusted, and ignored. It forced me to think about others not as a vague crowd, but as minds with appetites and histories. I made friends at the office, real ones. People who annoyed me, challenged me, invited me to lunch, remembered small things I said months earlier. I joined the neighborhood watch even. I volunteered at community events because Rachel volunteered first and then continued after she stopped. I attended church, helped organize services, found myself on committees. Religion in the apartment fascinated me. Everyone knew Anu was the true God. That fact was no more controversial than gravity had been on Earth. Yet people continued worshiping in the ways they had known in life. Christians gathered in churches. Muslims prayed in mosques. Hindus maintained temples. Ancient rites long dead on Earth continued beside modern services and private shrines. No one seemed to find contradiction in it. Anu, it seems, didn't really care who you worshipped in the afterlife, just that you learned your lesson. You purified your soul, in a sense. I only knew that kneeling in church didn't feel too bad. I prayed to Anu sometimes, awkwardly, with the discomfort of a convert who had arrived after dying. I prayed to the God I had known before too. Not because I believed sardonyx was wrong. It just was habit. If Anu objected, he didn't seem to care. Years gathered around me and something changed. For the first time in my existence, I felt like I belonged. I began watching the walls of our apartment, seeing if a door would outline itself one night. Still, nothing happened, but I felt something approaching, or thought I did. One night, Rachel and I lay in bed with the lights off and the quiet of the apartment wrapped around us. The room was dark except for a faint line of artificial moonlight slipping through the curtains. Neither of us was asleep. I could tell by the way she breathed. "What happens if one of us gets their door first?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. I wished I hadn't said it, but once spoken, the question filled the room. "I don't know." "What if it's yours?" "Dennis, what if it appears here for me or at your place and the other person doesn't get one?" She turned on her side to face me. I could just make out her expression in the dim light. "We always knew that was possible." "No, we knew it in the way people know the sun will burn out. Technically, but from a distance." Rachel reached for my hand beneath the blanket. Before she could say anything else, I said, "I won't go without you." Her fingers tightened around mine. "I mean it. If the door appears tomorrow, I'm not opening it. Not unless yours appears too." "Dennis." "No, I finally have this. I finally have you. I'm not walking away from it because the building decides I passed some test." For a long time, Rachel said nothing. Then she moved closer and rested her forehead against mine. "All right. You promise?" "I promise." "If only one of us ascends, neither of us ascends," I said. She was quiet for a moment longer. "Neither of us goes alone." I closed my eyes, and the promise settled over me with a comfort I mistook for peace. Outside our apartment, floor 8703 continued living. People worked late shifts, kissed in doorways, argued over bills, prayed under different names, watched movies, wrote songs, coached football, fell in love, and built lives beneath a ceiling that pretended to be a sky. Above us were thousands upon thousands of floors still waiting. At the top, if the building was honest, was heaven. For the first time since arriving, I believed that I might actually be getting ready to ascend. I fell asleep holding Rachel's hand. 300 years slipped past so quietly that neither of us noticed when we crossed it. Time had become a strange thing in the apartment. It no longer announced itself with birthdays or gray hair or aching knees. The body never changes, but the soul does. We marked anniversaries because we enjoyed them. Christmas came and went, summers passed beneath the artificial sun. Life continued. Rachel and I continued building our ordinary life together, and in many ways it was happier than the one either of us had known on Earth. We worked. She taught literature at one of the universities while I remained in advertising. I eventually opened up a small agency with two friends I'd met through church. The pastor changed several times over the centuries. Congregations came and went as people ascended. New arrivals filled empty pews. Familiar faces disappeared one by one. One night in bed, I said to Rachel, "You know, I don't think this place has felt like hell for me for a very long time." She smiled at me. I was thinking the same thing. If a door appeared tomorrow for you, we made a promise. We did. And I still mean it. So do I. That night, we went to bed exactly as we had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, nights before. I kissed her and she kissed me back and we said goodnight. Neither of us knew it would be the last time. The next morning, I woke to quiet. I called her name. I knew something was wrong right away. Rachel? The apartment answered with silence. I lay there another minute. Not sure, or not wanting to accept what I knew to be true. I looked to my left and saw a folded piece of paper resting on her pillow. Even before I reached for it, I understood. My fingers hesitated over the letter because unfolding it would make it real. The paper felt warm. My name was written across the front. Dennis. I unfolded it slowly. The first sentence was all it took. The door came during the night. I closed my eyes. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to read any further. I simply sat there with the letter in my hands, listening to the impossible quiet of an apartment that had never felt empty. Hundreds of years of shared mornings with Rachel and now it's gone? When I finally continued reading, I just, listen, I would have waited with my door there for tens of thousands of years if that's what it took for her to get hers. I never would have left her. I never would have left her. She signed it off with forward. The light embraced me, and I began the climb. The body hasn't even gone cold, and the police already called for her. The desperation in the officer's voice on the other end of the line was a far cry from the usual belittling tone she's met with. Solomon's Hotel. Body fitting all your criteria. Please be quick. That was all it took to make her catch the nearest taxi to the prestigious Solomon's. The towering hotel has been a staple of New York since the turn of the century when it was built. An Art Nouveau pillar holding up the dark sky of this rainy night. She'd been able to make it out in the distance by its hundreds of glowing windows illuminating the avenue beneath it. With squeaking brakes and water splashing onto the road as her taxi stops in a puddle, she pulls in front of Solomon's. After a few hushed words with the driver, she's quickly heading up the wet steps towards the front door, hand outstretched to push the revolving door, but something catches her eye. From her left, hidden by the hotel's shadow, stands a police officer, his long black-blue coat hiding him almost completely from sight. "Miss Taylor," he greets, stepping closer and out of the shadow, hand resting on the door's handle before she could reach it herself. "Thank you for coming." His voice is shaky as he leads her into the Solomon's lobby. "We've never seen something like this." She doesn't deign the officer with a response, saving her energy for why she was called here in the first place. There's nothing for her to say. As a result, Their march through the Solomons is spent in silence. At such a late hour, only the creaking of the polished pine floorboards and the resounding beat of their boots against them fills the dead air inside the hotel. The labyrinthian hallways and stairs with their ever-repeating patterns of doors and lamps seem to stretch on endlessly. She can hardly tell how much time has passed when finally the officer, his long coat still soaked by the rain, stops in front of an inconspicuous door left slightly ajar. Their boots still, and the policeman turns to face her, gesturing for her to enter. "This way, Miss Taylor. The coroner has arrived. I'll stay here," he says, looking down at the wet imprints he's left behind on the way here. "Wouldn't want to wash anything away." She ignores his comment, simply choosing to grimace at his ignorant lightheartedness as she pushes open the door and comes face to face with the crime scene she was called to look at for. The room is luxurious, spacious enough to be made out of multiple compartments, and yet she can still tell it's one of the hotel's cheaper options. It's obvious in the unpolished scratches in the wooden furniture and the dark corners the few lights don't quite manage to illuminate. A whole troop of officers mingle in the room, low murmurs filling the air along with the unmistakable voice of the coroner coming from what she can only call the room's living room. She pushes forward, through the officers crowding the already tight space, following the coroner's voice, slowly understanding more the closer she gets. "No rigor mortis. Limbs are still somewhat warm. Blood still fluid. How curious." His voice suddenly cuts off as his attention falls to her, eyes darting up from the body on the floor to smile up at her. "Ah, Taylor," he greets enthusiastically, gray beard crinkling as he speaks. "What does the expert make of this?" He gestures broadly at the room's floor, the body and its surroundings laid out before them, eyes shining with a form of morbid amusement. The sight in front of her would be horrifying for a lesser mind. The body of a black-haired, pale man lies on the living room floor, a metal stake thrust deep into his chest. This sight on its own would already be enough to become a burden on any average person, and yet it is not what makes this murder truly horrifying. Surrounding this young man's corpse are runes drawn in blood, a pentagram with dots in each corner along with a circle around it all. She has no response for the coroner, be it from curiosity taking a hold of her or not knowing enough to formulate a statement. She needs to see more. Pushing up her glasses with one hand, she leans down, taking a closer look at the victim. A young man, vaguely European, maybe Irish or Italian. She'd say maybe just past 30 at the highest. His suit appears expensive, a full black herringbone set with a white shirt turned maroon by his own blood beneath it. That brings her to the undeniable murder weapon, the metal stake in his chest. It glints warmly in the room's low light, despite it surely being ice-cold even if embedded in the warmth of freshly departed human flesh. Something about it just doesn't look right, though. The coloration of the metal does not appear to be like that of steel or iron. A voice in her head whispers, "Coroner," she addresses the older man leaning over the corpse. "You've got gloves. Pull on the stake for me and tell me how heavy it is." Almost instantly, the coroner's eyes light up and his smile grows sly. "Your trained eye never disappoints, Miss Taylor," he responds, leaning down even further, resting on his hand and feet as his other hand wraps around the stake. "Indeed, heavier than one might imagine, I would guess." "Lead." She cuts him short, already knowing the what he's thinking about. She takes another step forward, intrigued, only for her focus to be broken as her foot steps into something wet. Her eyes fly downward, realizing she stepped onto one of the runes painted around the seal. She recognizes the shape instantly, the Scorpio, the alchemical symbol for separation. But that's not the only thing that draws her attention. No, it's the human ink it's written with. His blood hasn't even fully dried yet, she whispers, astonished.
How long has this man been dead?
The coroner's attention shifts, the stake forgotten in his hand, eyes locking onto her much like an excited dog. He opens his mouth to answer, holding up one finger, as if to signal she asked a very good question. But instead, another man's voice comes from behind her, its authoritative tone instantly making the coroner snap his mouth shut. "Stop standing around. You're ruining the crime scene," the voice booms, followed by a tall man wearing a thin coat and a fedora pushing through the other officers to stand beside her at the edge of the gruesome painting. The man's head swivels from the coroner to her, to the corpse on the ground and back to her. He extends a hand. "I'm Amos, lead detective. And you are?" She shakes his hand, responding curtly.
"Taylor, paranormal expert."
Amos's face betrays he has thousands of questions, not to mention the slight lift to the corner of his mouth immediately making clear he's not really taking her seriously.
"How long has this man been dead?"
she asks, cutting off any of his possible questions that would only end up embarrassing him. There is no time for this silly game. They have a murder to investigate. To his credit, the detective's face smooths over like a wave beaching on sand, any trace of his humor replaced with a mask of confidence. "The front desk called the precinct around 90 minutes ago," he states, attention drifting to the coroner. "And that man can tell us."
2 hours? The coroner cries excitedly. "This man has been dead for just about 2 hours."
That manages to send a jolt through the detective, who turns to face the door leading to the hallway feverishly quickly. "This trail is still hot," he exclaims.
"The murderer may still be here,"
she extracts, following his train of thought.
"You said the front desk called this in?"
The detective nods, already leading the way towards the door. "They must remember who gave the tip, and whoever that was
may know our killer,"
she concludes, hot on his heels, leaving the crime scene behind them. As they begin to trek through the Solomon's hallways, the detective's head swivels towards her, his pace not faltering at all. "It looks like your expert analysis will have to wait, Miss Taylor," he says, as the ever-same pattern of doors and lamps pass them by.
"If you catch them now, we won't ever have to see each other again, detective,"
she allows herself to bite back, knowing he's not being serious about valuing her work. Amos grimaces, shaking his head with a smirk on his face. How can he find something to smile about while investigating such a terrible murder she has no idea? The Solomon's hallways stretch on endlessly, and somehow it feels like the route back takes even longer than the one to the crime scene. There's an anxiety building in the back of her mind, an uneasiness she can't place, but standing in the middle of a pair of stairs it finally hits her.
"We didn't use these stairs on the way here,"
she realizes, looking behind her as if to make sure she's not just imagining things. It's a weird feeling. Looking at the totally normal staircase, its luxurious railings and shiny floorboards, not even a bit out of place for the hotel. But she can't shake the feeling that this is the first time she's seen it. It sends her entire sense of direction reeling. Thinking about it, she also realizes with the way the Solomon is built, a skyscraper constructed snugly between other buildings in downtown New York, there is no way some of these hallways they've taken could have ever been this long without a single turn or bend. Something isn't right here. Amos, however, doesn't seem to notice. He stops and turns to face her, an expression on his face she can only call humoring. The corner of his mouth is slightly upturned and his eyes twinkle with amusement. "Your line of work would make anyone paranoid, wouldn't it?" he attempts to joke, though it can hardly be called successful, as all he receives is a blank stare of unhidden loathing. He returns to leading the way towards the lobby. "You must have taken another route to this crime scene. Nothing to get obsessed about. Let's keep going," he offers up, voice defeated. She hopes it's a sign he stops trying to joke around. She can hear the detective's steps retreating from her already, moving deeper and deeper into the hotel, while she still can't take her eyes off the staircase. It feels like it will vanish the second she turns her back towards it. "Miss Taylor, please. There is a killer on the loose." Amos's voice echoes from the other end of the hallway, waiting for her in front of a sharp turn where they lose sight of one another. Her mind wrestles with itself, knowing her intuition won't betray her, but having no evidence to convince the detective of it. She's powerless. With a heavy heart, she rips her gaze away from the staircase, rushing down the hallway to catch up with Amos. The endless pattern of the hotel continues in front of them, and while she only grows more perturbed with every step they take, the detective seems unshakable in his ignorance. However, to his credit, or the fool's luck credit, they do arrive at the Solomon's lobby. The large entrance looks unchanged to when she arrived. The rain still patters against the glass, the red sofas surrounding the coffee table in the waiting area remain unoccupied, and the lone secretary she ignored after entering still sits hunched over a bunch of paperwork at the front desk too. The detective marches towards the woman with purpose, while the secretary seems hardly to notice. Only as Amos's hands slam onto the fine wooden desk she works at does she look up, eyes jumping up in fear for just a moment before she seems to calm down. "Hello, sir. How can I help you?" the secretary asks diplomatically. Obvious the same spiel she uses on every person that visits her desk. It doesn't surprise her that Amos hasn't introduced himself before, but it certainly doesn't add any merits to her mental image of him. Detective Amos doesn't seem bothered by being mistaken for a guest, choosing to cut straight to the point instead. "You called the local police precinct notifying us about a death in this hotel, correct?" he asks, tone of voice making clear the question is meant to be more rhetorical than anything else. But the girl sitting opposite of them doesn't seem to think so. She stares at Amos with large, fearful eyes, eyebrows creasing as soon as they said the word death. She sputters, trying to form a response. I don't... what? Amos interrupts, barking loudly. "Who gave you the tip? Who told you about the murder in room 66? The secretary looks utterly distraught, blinking wildly as if she tries to remember but just can't. Her forehead creases painfully as she stutters. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't... Fuck! Amos yells, slamming his palm onto the desk once again. "How could you forget?" he demands angrily, and she can tell he's trying hard to keep himself from reaching for the girl's shoulders and shaking her. Tears start to gather in the corners of the girl's eyes, and Taylor shoves the detective aside. "How do we get back to room 66 as fast as possible?" she asks softly. Eyes focus on Amos, reprimanding him for pushing the girl too far too quickly with a deathly stare. The detective simply rolls his eyes in response, grumbling to himself. "The elevator," the girl tells her quietly, after having a hard time to gather herself. "Take the elevator to the 3rd floor and head left." "Thank you," she says, nodding and grabbing the detective's arm to drag him along. "Hey, he protests before she cut him off. She doesn't know. She ends the discussion, tapping the elevator button feverishly. "We need to get back to the crime scene. If this..." she tries to continue, but her mind turns blank as the glinting steel doors of the elevator are pushed aside and she gets to peer inside. Behind the door is another hallway, the same long corridor lined with lamps and doors they've wandered before. She sees no end to the hall, stretching on forever until it collapses into darkness. A breathless, disbelieving sigh makes it past Amos's lips. He shakes his head, slowly at first, then faster and faster. The upset over the secretary forgotten, the detective rushes over to the next elevator, smashing his palm against the call button. She hears him murmur. At first, she can hardly make it out, but as the doors begin to open, it grows into a shout she can't understand. "No, no, 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 no!" he cries in frustration, eyes wide with fear. The detective's mask, forged hard by years of service, breaks, and just for a moment, his face looks like that of a child again, faced with the incomprehensible and otherworldly terror he cannot understand. On the other side of the elevator is a spiral staircase extending as high as it is deep. The coldness of the stone steps encloses her like a cloud of smoke, sending a shiver down her spine and seeping into her bones. She keeps her eyes trained on the staircase, desperately willing it to vanish, to close her eyes and be faced with a normal elevator, to not have this become reality. Amos breathes in deeply next to her, needy, too quick to really fill his lungs in any meaningful way. He swivels on his feet, boots squeaking painfully loud as he turns and grips her shoulders. "What is going on, Taylor? What's happening?" he demands, voice shaking from a dangerous mix of apprehension and anger. She struggles to find an answer, failing at even gathering the right words to explain what she thinks is going on. Her mouth opens and closes repeatedly, making her look more like a fish on land than a paranormal expert. A moment of silence passes between them. Amos's arms visibly tensing as a vein on his throat pulses aggressively. Slowly, a sentence begins to form in her mind to try and explain what this could be, but Amos's attention begins to shift once more before she can speak. His head turns towards where there previously had been the Solomon's large window looking out onto the street, his neck seemingly grinding past his spine with how reluctant his head moves. The windows have vanished, as had the entrance. Instead, a naked brick wall with inconspicuous wooden doors placed erratically stands there, some even sitting several meters above the ground, unreachable for anything human. "No way," Amos breathes out in utter disbelief. His strength leaves his arms, resting limply on her shoulders. The hotel is changing in front of them, its shape defying its architecture and all laws of physics. "Come on," she exclaims, grabbing Amos's arm again, trying to pull him along the back towards the front desk. The secretary still sits there, still hunched over the same mountain of paperwork, a fountain pen in hand. Hey! She shouts, trying to get the other woman's attention as she storms towards her. The girl's head whips up with a hum when she realizes she's being addressed, a perfectly trained smile spreading on her face. "How can I help you, miss?" she asks, exact same professional tone of voice she had used with Amos. It has Taylor pause. Her eyes flit from her to the detective back to her again, no recognition apparent on her face. Did she forget them? How did... She attempts to ask, but she doesn't manage to get out a sentence that would be fitting given her bewilderment. The secretary seems none the wiser to her predicament, lying down her pen and resting her palms flat on her desk. "Miss, do you need assistance? Is something wrong?" she offers. Taylor's mouth opens, wanting to voice a response she doesn't quite know yet herself, but before that can happen, Amos grips her elbow tight, hissing into her ear. "I'm not waiting around another second until you tell me exactly what the hell is going on here," he demands, the shaken man replaced once again by the cocky detective she got to know first. She halts, sorting her thoughts and giving him the only explanation she is able to muster up. "The seal is in the hotel room," she starts, gesturing for him to follow, leaving the entranced secretary behind at her desk without another word. "That seal is used to trap demons." "So, this is some kind of exorcism gone wrong?" Amos questions skeptically, hands resting on hips, one just above where his revolver sits in its holster. She sighs, a stressed, almost sardonic noise. "No idea. The seal was surrounded by the Scorpio, the symbol for separation. I've never heard of it being used like that," she says, defeated. I can't explain this." They stop in front of the hallway, one step away from leaving the lobby behind. The detective starts to ask cautiously, "So, our victim?" She glances over at him standing next to her, his eyes fixed on the point at the end of the corridor, the hotel's very own horizon. "Was probably part of this ceremony, a sacrifice of some sort, I'd wager," she attempts to reason, not entirely sure if her theory even ends up holding water or not. A moment of silence passes between them, filled with the uneasy acknowledgement of their own powerlessness. The hotel is changing now, stretching impossibly into space, a plaything in the hands of something otherworldly, to be assembled, rebuilt, and, possibly, discarded. And even if they make it through the devil's sandbox back to the crime scene, how could she guarantee they can stop it? "This is insane," Amos breathes. How do we... He stops, sucking in a shaky breath. How do we stop it? How do we get out of here?" "I don't know," she answers earnestly, shaking her head. "No, not really. I've never seen anything like this." She gazes into the corridor stretching out near endlessly in front of her. If she concentrates hard enough, she could swear she sees the hallway shift in front of her, rotating, bending, changing.
If we can disrupt the seal, maybe that could stop it.
Maybe? Amos questions, his eyebrow quirked up. That's all? A maybe? What kind of paranormal expert are you?
What else is there to do? Do you want to hunker down and die here? Lose your mind like the girl at the front desk?
The detective quiets down, a pained look crossing his face as he thinks. His eyes remain fixed on the corridor. She hears him breathe in deeply and sigh, a deeply tired and resigned sound, resembling a suffering animal more than a hardened officer of the law.
If you have any other idea, I'd...
She starts to try and reason with Amos, but the detective manages to shock her into silence. The moment the air leaves his lungs fully, his foot lands one step forward in the hotel's cursed hallway. "Let's go," he says, voice defeated, the frown on his face and his distaste with this decision audible in the way he speaks the words. The suddenness of his movement leaves her frozen, watching helplessly as he begins to march deeper into the Solomon's bowels. "Taylor," the detective calls over his shoulder, his head turned around looking at her without slowing his pace any bit. "Are you coming?" The tone of his voice, the mocking, too witty for his own good sound, manages to shake her out of her shackled state, sending her scrambling to follow before the hotel can make it impossible for her to do so. "You think we can stop it by destroying the crime scene?" the detective questions, his tone of voice not out of curiosity, but rather of someone waiting orders, like a soldier, an officer. The rapid beating of her boots against the pine floor slowly evens out as she catches up with Amos, her hand reaching up to push her glasses again after her impromptu sprint. "Do you have any idea about how many of this works? You can't tell me anything, can you?" says Amos, his eyes scanning the walls for any irregularities. His words may sound ill-meaning, but his behavior betrays nothing of the sort. His attention is elsewhere, watching their surroundings like a hawk, now entirely focused on how the Solomon's Hotel could have changed in the time they spent in the lobby. She grits her teeth.
"How many people do you think have lived through this and had time to write about how they did it?" she states. "I analyze crime scenes, not deal with whatever this is. You'd probably get better answers from a priest at this point."
Amos's head whirls around, his face marred with a devilish mixture of both fury and annoyance, but it washes off his face the instant his eyes fall on her, or rather, the path they've already left behind them. "Taylor," he breathes, blinking rapidly. Turn around." Immediately she stops, boots as if tethered to the floor. She tries to study Amos's disbelieving expression for any indication of what she might find beside herself, but she doesn't manage to see anything she recognizes. Slowly, her head turns, hairs on the back of her neck standing up, making her skin feel like the scales of a fish. Behind her remains the hallway, the same it had been when they walked it, but its form is twisted, it's turned, contorted like a wrung-out washcloth. The floor they've been steadily moving forwards on has been rotating around its own axis the whole time. Has it been like this from the start? Her hand reaches out in an instant, snatching Amos's arm. "Come on, we need to go!" Her feet thunder against the hotel's pine floor as she drags the detective along for the first few steps of her sprint, Amos only being able to wrestle his gaze away from the corridor a moment after her. She keeps moving straight, knowing, seeing, that the floor in front of her isn't bending sideways. It's an impossibility. Nonetheless, when she finally does glance backwards, she comes face to face with the fact that the corridor keeps turning and turning around itself behind them. The wavy pattern in which the floors, walls, and ceilings shift almost mesmerizingly beautiful. "Taylor, a turn!" Amos shouts. Now the detective's the one who's dragging her along, their unforgiving pace having her stumble for the first few steps after beginning to run anew. Sure enough, his vision doesn't deceive the detective. A few more meters in front of them, their route bends to the right. It's a struggle to make the sharp turn at their speed, almost leading them to crash into the wall, but they just about manage without tumbling over their own feet. The hallway keeps going, but its end is finally in sight. An elevator door stands at the end of the hall, tall and imposing, its polished silver doors glinting in the light. Its screen shows that it's moving, something approaching to arrive at their floor. Without much thinking, she rams her elbow into the detective's side. "Amos," she manages to start, but whatever half-baked thought she was about to voice is cut short by the pleasant ping signifying the elevator's arrival. The second between this and the elevator's doors spreading open manages to feel like an eternity. Still, no amount of time could have prepared them for what passes through those doors. Its noise precedes it, rushing water, as if someone turned the valve of an especially large pipe. Then it comes, a wave, as tall as the doors and as broad as the entire hallway. The sound of the water crashing against the walls is ear-shattering. To her right, Amos rips open a room's door. She can see his lips move as he screams something, but no words manage to reach her. She didn't need to hear them anyway. All but throwing herself towards the door, her chest crashes into Amos's back as they scramble to get out of the way. She lands face first on the floor while the detective swirls around to close the door behind them, the wave crashing audibly against the other side of the door multiple times, the noise as loud as a tree being broken in half, until it seems it's moving on further down the hall. When some water manages to leak through from underneath the door, a large puddle has already accumulated on the floor the moment she pushes herself back onto her feet. Amos inhales ragged, shaking breaths, his back still pushing against the door with all his might. His face is disfigured by a mask of utter primal fear. She doesn't know what she could say to make it any better. Looking around, she's forced to come to the realization that instead of entering a hotel room as one would expect, they've ended up in another hallway. So, just like the elevator doors in the lobby, that means that even the doors to the rooms don't have to lead where they were supposed to. That will make finding room 66 even more difficult. Her boots leave behind wet imprints as she continues heading down this new corridor. It doesn't look as nice as the ones that came before it. Gone is the polished pine, replaced with concrete and dull oak furnishing. Bronze shimmering pipes run along the walls, leading deeper down into the almost pitch-black heart of the Solomons. "Amos, we need to go before something else happens. We can't stay." The detective's breathing echoes behind her, slowly but surely growing more even and shallow with each inhale. At first, she's not sure if he'll follow, but sure enough, after enough time, the wet sound of his footsteps joins hers right behind her. "You're taking this awfully well," he comments dryly, still slightly out of breath. "Given this damned hotel just tried to fucking kill us, I would think you'd be more shocked." She shrugs. "You've seen what the hotel can do. If it can change its shape like that, who knows what else it's capable of doing now?" What it can do now. Amos pauses. "Do you think it's doing whatever this is consciously? That it knows what is happening? That it knows what we're trying to do?" She can feel Amos's thoughts spiraling in the way he speaks, holding her hands up placatively to try and offer an explanation. But the detective has already stopped walking, eyes wide open, staring dead ahead. What if us walking through the hotel is hurting it? What if that's why this is happening to us? "The hotel is not conscious, Amos," she states decisively. They're... She has to grit her teeth to stop her defeated sigh from being too audible. "It's just not possible." Amos's eyes tell her more than 1,000 words ever could. He doesn't share her belief about the Solomons. "And what are you going to do about it?" She addresses him furiously. "Are you not going to try and help me stop this? Do you have a bleeding heart for a poor living hotel? Can you even tell anymore how stupid that is?" Her outburst shocks her. Years of being belittled by every other element of law enforcement made sure her skin is as thick as iron. It seems she even has a limit still. The detective stays quiet, the same skeptical expression on his face as if she hadn't said anything at all. Finally, after seconds that begun to stretch into an eternity, he puts his hands on his hips, strutting past her, his face grim. He doesn't bring it up again, but she can tell the thought of being inside something so strange yet possibly alive doesn't leave him alone. Their search for room number 66 continues, ever vigilant for the Solomons to change right in front of them. The numbers on the walls are withered and hard to read, making their quest even harder than it had been previously. She's not sure how much time passes as they walk down the hallway. She's lost her feeling for it somewhere along the way. It's starting to get to her how little progress they've made, and she can tell something similar is happening to the detective. Be it from curiosity or frustration, she feels like they are at the end of their rope. So she begins to open doors. Cautiously at first, pushing them open inch by inch until she can take a peek inside, fearful of what she might come face to face with. Some are other hallways. Some are even real suites. Others more staircases or elevators or any of the other many little rooms a normal hotel has. So, naturally, finding only the mundane, her caution fades. Amos begins to follow her lead at some point as well, searching not only the corridor in front of them for room number 66, but also the many worlds hidden by the doors lining the walls. It helps put her mind at ease, at least increasing their chances to find the crime scene on paper, given the Solomon changes its shape seemingly at will. But the more they look, the more unsettled she starts to grow. The corridor they've seen before have already been unbelievably long, but behind more and more doors, the hallways take on turns and twists no human architect could create. Similarly, many of the rooms begin to blend together. Maintenance tunnels stacked with luxury beds, boiler rooms with oil paintings, suites with windows into other rooms, and staircases with upside-down railings. It's like someone is trying to recall what makes up a hotel, but their memory is failing them. Rooms, pipes, halls, windows. They've seen hundreds, thousands, and all otherworldly variations that no human was ever meant to see with her own eyes. She's all but given up hope to find room 66, so when she does finally find a hint of the pivotal room, she can't even believe her eyes. Behind one of the doors, she's lost count of how many they've looked through by now, another corridor greets her. This one is turned 90 degrees, apparently stretching endlessly to the heavens and to the deepest pits of the earth. She'd slam the door shut and move on, but at the last moment something catches her eye. Opposite of her, the room number now turned sideways, is the door to the crime scene. 66. "Amos!" she bellows down the hall. "Amos, I found it!" The detective's steps thunder against the floor as he rushes towards her, coming to stop right behind her, staring at their destination over her shoulder. "Holy shit," he breathes, running a hand through his hair. "How are we going to get across?" He leans his head forwards, gazing down into the abyss quickly before flitting his eyes back up to focus on the door again. He does not look back down. How do they get across? By jumping, obviously, unless they somehow find a ladder, but first they'll have to get the door open. Her eyes wander, searching for any kind of possible tool that could help them get the door open. Some kind of hook or stick. It doesn't take long for her to find a solution to their problem. The brass piping running along the walls almost immediately catches her attention. Reaching out with both her arms spread wide, she pulls on the tube carefully, feeling it slowly turn where the individual pieces are threaded into each other. Taylor immediately doubles her effort, hearing the metal squeal as the pieces grind against each other. She doesn't quite manage to get it to budge. "Amos, a hand!" she shouts over her shoulder, hearing him arrive just a moment later behind her. They reposition, both now at one end of the loosened pipe. Both their hands wrap around the cold metal ready to pull with all they got. Amos counts down. 1, 2, 3. With an ear-shattering groan, the piping moves towards them, slowly at first, but with a sudden high-pitched squeal. All resistance vanishes. She almost falls over backwards from how quickly it happens. After just a few more turns, now easily done by just using their fingers, the tube is fully removed. Disgusting brown water trickles out of the remaining piping, turning the floor a putrid black color. A moment of quiet follows as the dripping ceases, A short respite from what has happened and what they will still have to do, until a new noise begins to fill their ears. A growing pressure, a low whistle turning into loud buzzing coming from the pipes. Rushing water. Her eyes snap onto Amos, and his expression tells her he caught on too. Another wave is coming out of the tubes. Without saying another word, Amos takes the lead, heading right back over to the open door leading to the sideways hallway. Pipe in hand, he reaches out for the handle, arm stretched out but not even crossing more than half the distance of the abyss. "Fuck!" he yells, dropping onto his stomach in an instant to try and increase his reach. Nervously, she whips her head around to check on the pipes, all the hairs on her body standing up in fear after seeing water gush into the hallway strong enough to sweep a grown person off their feet. "Amos!" she screams in panic, feeling the water already begin to pool around her. The detective is still trying to press down on the door handle, maybe just a few centimeters short of finally getting it. As the puddle begins to even reach his feet and they are nowhere close to getting into room 66, she wants to give Amos the final push he needs to get them out of here. Falling to her knees, she holds on to Amos's belt and pants for dear life. He glances back, a questioning look on his face, but they don't have time for that. "Keep going, I'll hold you," she tells him, and instantly the detective's attention is back on the door. The water is beginning to wet their clothes, seeping into her pants and Amos's shirt. She watches him hopelessly reaching for the door handle, inching forward just a bit every time he misses. He's hanging over the abyss from his chest up when finally, the pipe manages to reach the door to room 66. She hears the noise of metal grinding on metal once, twice, even over the noise of the water, her own beating heart and the muttered curses from Amos until finally, the tube catches the handle just right and the door opens. "Yes!" Amos yells in elation as she opens the door forward, tossing the pipe into the abyss without a second thought. He leaps onto his feet, standing again and not losing a second to try and make the jump before the current grows too strong for them to stand. The detective seems to doubt himself for just a second, taking a step forward before immediately taking two back. Nevertheless, it doesn't manage to shake him. A moment later, he runs, jumping and crossing the abyss and heading headfirst for the open door. It's almost like time passes more slowly as she watches him fly through the air. Her heart thunders in her chest, crashing deep against her ribcage just as Amos does when he hits the door, holding on just barely before finding his grip and pulling himself up. He made it. Now it's her turn. She pulls off her coat first. It was soaked full of water anyway, before taking several steps back to prepare for the jump. The water reaches up to cover her boots almost entirely at this point. Any more and running will start to get impossible. Now or never. Her eyes lock onto the door, forcing herself to ignore the bottomless pit she'll have to cross. If Amos managed to, she can too. A deep breath, the beating of her heart, the rushing water behind her, and she runs. 3 times her boots hit the ground before she takes off, leaping over the abyss with a silent prayer on her lips. The darkness beckons below her feet, but she does not listen to its call. She crosses the pit, arriving at the other side with her upper body almost halfway through the door. Pushing herself up and swinging her legs over the ledge, she finally stands in room 66, soaked to her bones. She heaves for air, hands on her knees to try and manage the adrenaline in her body. In and out, in and out. The raucous beat in her chest slowly subsides, and with every passing second, she feels more and more like she can finally look up. Amos already stands in the middle of the room, one hand on his hip revealing his gun once more while the other rubs his face anxiously. His back is turned towards her, his eyes fixed forward towards the hotel's back wall. Slowly, his head turns backwards to face her, eyes wide, gargantuan enough to be almost comical, yet his expression, still half hidden by his hand covering his mouth, is nothing to laugh at. All his features shine with the unmistakable emotion of despair. That's when she sees it. Even if this may have been the door to room 66, this is not the crime scene. There is no body. There is no seal. This is a normal room. No, 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 she mutters, shaking her head violently. The rooms changed. Of course they have. Just like the hallways and doors, all the suites are shifting around as well. Then that means
We can't find it,
she admits defeatedly.
if it's all changing.
Our room could be behind any door. This was all pointless. Amos finishes her sentence, pressing his palms against his eye sockets so hard she can see his arms shake. They spent what feels like an eternity in uneasy silence, just their shaky breathing and the otherworldly groans of the solemnest movements in the far, far distance filling the air. Their one hope to possibly stop this incomprehensible corruption lies squandered in front of them, destined to either search forever for a destination that keeps changing, or die miserably hiding away inside the belly of the beast. She doesn't know how much time they spent in this would-be Room 66, sitting opposite one another on the ground staring at nothing. The hopelessness of their situation settled deep inside their bones. Amos leans his head backwards, a hollow thunk following as it hits the wall. He sighs, palms sliding forward on the ground until they suddenly form fists. "Fuck it," he says, jumping onto his feet with a disturbing determination on his face.
Amos?
She asks, unsure of what could have possessed the detective so suddenly. The officer ignores her question, searching the apartment for something only he knows. Confidently, he steps toward a trophy decorating the wall, the severed head of a buck. Without much deliberation, he reaches up for one of its antlers, breaking it off with just a flick of his wrist.
Amos?
She repeats, more puzzled than she was even the first time. Has the detective finally lost it? She'd understand if he did, truly. After all, they are both going to go sooner rather than later. Antler in hand, he walks back towards her, pausing momentarily to kick a table and its chairs out of the way, creating a large free space right in the middle of the hotel room. Standing in front of her, he reaches down, rolling up his pant leg before, with a frightening intensity, stabbing his own shin with one of the antler's ends, pulling it down towards his ankle, creating a gash which immediately has blood drip onto his shoes and the floor. "This," he starts, panting slightly as his eyes drift up to meet hers. "This is how we end it." He gestures at the space he just cleared out. "You said the crime scene was a seal that was broken." A pause. He wets his lips anxiously. "What if we repaired it? You said it was a separation. What if we did one with reinforcement, multiplication, addition?" His eyes shine, the border between fear and insanity apparent for all to see in them. She pushes herself to her knees to respond.
Amos, it's not that easy. We don't...
"Does it matter?" He cuts her off. "Does it matter if we are going to die here anyway? We might as well try." His hands quiver. From fear or frustration, she cannot say. From the way his lips shake as he stares her down, it's obvious this is born from a desperate need of not wanting to die on his knees.
Amos,
she begins to beg, hoping to suffocate any childish ideas of saving the day at the last minute. They are going to die here. She's sure of it now. The detective should start to make peace with it as well. But he interrupts her again. "If you want to rot here, feel free to spend your last moments groveling for mercy. I don't want to die from this curse." He clenched his fists against his thighs, an emotional outburst completely unbecoming of a trained professional and resembling a toddler throwing a tantrum more than anything else. His face morphs into something more pained as he continues a moment later, voice now almost as quiet as a whisper. "If it's all the same to you, then die whenever you want. The least you could do is try and help me not to." She can't look him in the eyes as he says it. The hurt and pain and fear too much for her to bear. Maybe it's because the words would resonate. Maybe it's because she sees the logic behind it. She sighs, slowly rising. A strange smile is painted on her face. Be it from having made her peace or trying to appease the detective, she doesn't know.
Okay,
she breathes, holding out her hand for the bloodied antler. She does as Amos has done, taking one of its sharpened ends to her flesh to draw blood. The warm feeling of it running down her leg manages to remind her she's alive still. Together, they recreate the seal with their blood. It doesn't take long. Its interlocking shapes as if burned into their minds. Instead of the Scorpio, she surrounds it with the Gemini, the symbol of fixation, hoping, if possible, it could strengthen the seal once again. Standing over the finished ungodly stamp, her vision narrows down into pinpricks, a gray haze dominating her vision. The exhaustion from their search and the blood loss are catching up with her finally. She doesn't mind. For this next part, she won't mind not being all there anymore. Amos doesn't seem to have caught up fully yet, expectantly gazing at the blood on the floor with a broad grin on his face. Carefully, she steps into the middle of the seal. The detective's eyes slowly drift up towards her as nothing seems to happen, the seal seemingly unfinished, his expression returning to utter despair. Taylor, He starts stumbling forward just one step, exhaustion also obviously catching up with him too. Thankfully, or else this next part of her plan would probably never work. With his step forward, he's in arm's reach of her. She jumps at him, one of her hands landing squarely on his chest while the other goes for the revolver on his belt. Just as quick as she came on to him, she pushes him away, sending him tumbling to the ground, the gun now in her hand. The cold iron of the gun makes it past her teeth, leaving the taste of blood on her tongue even more before she takes the shot. She cocks the hammer, the noise filling the dead silent room like a lightning strike. "Taylor!" Amos screams, scrambling onto his feet to try and stop her, but she made her peace. This isn't settled with just a drawing. No. This has to be made a contract. And this kind of contract requires a sacrifice. She locks her eyes with the detective, mumbling clunkily and almost unintelligibly past the steel in her mouth. At least they'll believe you. And Taylor doesn't get to hear the shot that kills her.